Good afternoon. I'd like to call the March 17th meeting of the Santa Barbara City Planning Commission to order. Ms. Rodriguez, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Schwartz. Absent. Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Here.
Commissioner Bartlett.
Here.
Vice Chair Lodge.
Here.
Chair Jostes.
Here. Our first item is the approval of our minutes and resolutions from previous meetings. So I'd like to entertain any comments on the draft minutes of March 3rd. Does anybody have any changes or revisions to those minutes? Okay, the next piece of information is Resolution 003-11, 500 James Fowler Road. Any changes to those? Mr. Bartlett?
No.
Okay. Seeing no green lights on, let's move on to Resolution 004-11, 415 Allen Road. Any changes on that resolution? Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of March 3rd as well as Resolutions 003 and 004-11.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chair, I abstain from that as I was recused from that item.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobs. Mr. Cato, are there any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or additions of ex-agenda items today?
No, there are not.
Okay. What about announcements and appeals?
One announcement about an appeal. The 415 Allen Road project, which you just approved the minutes for and the resolution, that was appealed to City Council, and that will be heard in the middle of July at the applicant's request.
Okay. And when we get closer to that, we can designate an individual from the commission to represent us.
Chair Joseph, if you wanted to do that now, I could note it down, and we wouldn't have to remember to do it later.
I think it'd probably be better to wait until a couple of months because who knows what vacations are going to crop up in front of us, and so when we get maybe to the early part of June, we'll be in a better spot to take care of that matter. Okay, that brings us to a opportunity and agenda for members of the public to address the Commission on matters not on our agenda today. Do we have any green slips? Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close that portion of the meeting, and we'll get directly into our first item, which is a new item, application of Caltrans, District 5, regarding 101 in the vicinity of Salinas Street, off-ramps.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I will be stepping down from this item, and adjacent property owner is represented by the law firm that my husband is a member of. And to avoid any perceived conflict of interest through this decision process, I will recuse myself.
We're sorry to lose you, but hope you can come back a little later then. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. At this point, Mr. Gullett, would you like to walk us through the staff report?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This proposal is to amend the Highway 101 Operational Improvements Coastal Development Permit. This project is otherwise known as the Milpas to Hot Springs project. This amendment would provide a third through lane through the Salinas interchange. It would also result in a reduction in median and outside landscaping. Concrete drainage would be undergrounded and culverted with the project, and sound walls adjacent to Salinas Street would be changed as part of this project to provide for appropriate site distance. The project also involves new guardrails and relocation of signs and lighting. The Operational Improvements Project is the first project of 4 that would lead to the eventual 3-laning of Highway 101 between Milpas Street and Muscle Shoals. The other project within the city's jurisdiction that your commission was briefed on previously is the High Occupancy Vehicle Project, or HOV project. This project extends in the city's jurisdiction to Olive Mill, and there is overlap between the Milpista Hot Springs project and the HOV project. Much of that overlap would be addressed with this coastal development permit amendment. This is a pre-construction aerial of the project site. This is the Bird Refuge, Montecito Country Club, and the Salinas ramps. So the project extends from Sycamore Creek up to about this point across from the Bird Refuge. A contentious aspect of this project has been the reduction of landscaping from the approved project. The median planting would be reduced for about 0.43 miles. The approved project has a 10-foot median, which is from the outside of the barrier face to the outside of the other barrier face. That width would be narrowed as part of this project in the smallest section down to 3 feet 3 inches. And if you account for the actual width of the barriers, it's approximately 2 feet 8 inches between those barriers. The project would also result in the removal of 3 oak trees and 2 eucalyptus trees that are part of the approved landscape plan and reduce shrubs along the sound wall. Caltrans is proposing to provide some off-site landscaping improvement, which Mr. Emerson, Caltrans landscape architect, will discuss further in the applicant's presentation. Benefits of this project include furthering the city's goal of congestion relief on Highway 101. This congestion relief would occur 5 to 10 years sooner with this project than it would with the eventual successor HOV project. The subject project would also reduce construction impacts to this section of 101 because the section would not need to be revisited with the HOV project. Also, according to Caltrans, there would be significant reduced overall costs, and there are currently additional funds available to do this work now. In order for your commission to approve this amendment, there are coastal development permit findings that you would have to make. That the project is consistent with the policies of the Coastal Act and all policies of the city's local coastal plan, implementing guidelines and provisions of the municipal code. And I'll just briefly cover 3 pertinent policy groups that were also covered in the staff report. The first is water quality. There are policies in the Coastal Act and the local coastal plan that require protection and enhancement of water quality in the coastal zone. This project site drains into the Bird Refuge, and it's also adjacent to Sycamore Creek. The project would result in a reduction of landscaping and overall increase in impervious area. But staff believes that compliance with the city's stormwater management program would ensure compliance with these policies. The local coastal plan also includes several policies related to visual quality that are specific to Highway 101. They are to preserve the unique scenic and aesthetic quality of 101 in general, also minimize landscape removal, and create a lush appearance. And I just wanted to backtrack to the coastal access policies. There are policies in the local coastal plan, also the circulation element and pedestrian master plan offers guidance that to provide a new pedestrian access across this segment of Highway 101, essentially between the east side and the zoo. Both Caltrans and SBCAG have expressed support of providing access at this location, and SBCAG is committed to seeking funding to study a pedestrian crossing at this location. So returning to visual quality, the Highway 101 Coastal Parkway Design Guidelines were adopted by the city to implement the local coastal plan. The stated intent of the design guidelines is to maintain Highway 101 consistent with its historic character and allow necessary traffic and safety improvements. It does provide a lot of guidance on landscaping and requires that design review team review any projects within the coastal zone that are in the 101 corridor. So for this project, a design review team was formed, including members of the Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, and Historic Landmarks Commission. The design review team reviewed the project on November 9th. There was a site visit on November 17th and another review on January 12th. The consensus of the DRT for the project that they reviewed was that the reduction of landscaping was not acceptable and that a wider median was necessary to support the appropriate plantings. Members also expressed concern regarding the reduction of the outside plantings. This project is in the jurisdiction of the Architectural Board of Review, who reviewed this project once on February 7th. ABR stated that the project didn't include adequate landscaping to provide the visual gateway that's consistent with the guidance of the 101 design guidelines, and continued the project on a 7-0 vote back to ABR. So due to time constraints on the project, Caltrans has elected to proceed to your commission before going back to ABR, but has added plantings adjacent to the sound wall and has also proposed those off-site median landscaping improvements. ABR and the design review team both have not reviewed those changes. So the difficulty, essentially there's two ways to provide additional landscaping in the right-of-way. One is right-of-way acquisition, which Caltrans has said is not feasible due to the constraints of this section of 101. Union Pacific right-of-way abuts the Caltrans right-of-way, and there is low-income housing in the trailer parks adjacent to Caltrans right-of-way on the other side. The other way to provide additional landscaping is Caltrans approving design exceptions like narrower shoulder widths or lane widths. This is an internal process at Caltrans. Caltrans has recently stated that design exceptions are not available for this project at this location due to concerns about worker safety. So staff has had trouble reconciling this information with the visual policies and guidelines and direction by the design review team and ABR. So staff is therefore not making a recommendation on this application either way. Staff does believe there's sufficient information for the Planning Commission to act on this application, and approval findings, including CEQA findings, are outlined in Exhibit A of the staff report. Denial findings are also provided in Section 8 of the staff report. And just briefly with environmental review, for the operational improvements project, Caltrans is the lead agency. They're the lead agency on this project. The EIR for the operational improvements project was certified in March 2004. There was an addendum prepared for project changes before the city took action on the project in December 2004. And for the subject project, Caltrans prepared an addendum in February. So that addendum found that there are increased wetland impacts from culverting the concrete drainage ditch. Essentially, the ditch filled with some silt and some wetland plants started growing in the drainage ditch. It was not intended to be a landscaped drainage. So the mitigation would be 1-to-1 at some location along Sycamore Creek, and the area is approximately 800 square feet. The addendum also found that there would be no significant changes in noise impacts due to the changes of the sound walls and the increased capacity of the freeway. Exhibit A also includes staff recommended conditions in case the commission chooses to approve the project. They include a condition for wetland mitigation, compliance with the city's stormwater management program requirements, landscape maintenance in perpetuity, and requirement for design review submittals for the off-site median landscaping improvements. And unless Mr. Cato or Mr. Dayton have anything to add, that concludes staff's comments. We have members of the design review team. Phil Suding is here and Judy Arias is here, representatives from the Historic Landmarks Commission. Also, I believe Paul Zink will be, Paul Zink is here representing the ABR. And for the applicant, Greg Hart is here from SB CAG. David Beard is here from Caltrans. He's the Caltrans project manager. And Dave Emerson is the Caltrans landscape architect, and they will be presenting for Caltrans.
Thank you, Mr. Gullet. Before the applicant starts, I want to just make a note that anybody who has their cell phone with them today should be sure and either turn it off or put it on silence or vibrate so we don't get interruptions. I know there's a lot to talk about today, and I want to make sure we do that as effectively as we can. Mr. Hart.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, thank you for the time to talk about this project. We really view this as a unique opportunity to advance a section of the 101 HOV project much sooner than would otherwise be the case. In fact, looking back at the project that's under construction today, it was originally amended back when it was in the design phase because the project originally would have had an auxiliary lane going from Hot Springs Cabrillo, getting off at Salinas, just like you see out there on the highway today, and another auxiliary lane that would have gone from Salinas and gotten off at Milpas. But while we were developing that project, we realized that didn't make a lot of sense. The city was very supportive of extending the third lane up and over the Milpas Street Bridge. So that design change was made in the existing project. The construction of that northbound bridge is happening right now. So this is sort of going back like that effort and adding in the missing section of the freeway where we need to have that third lane continue all the way up to Milpas. So just to give you a little bit of background and context, this is a chart that I use to sort of describe the problem that we're facing. You know, looking ahead in time, the traffic congestion that's out there on the road right now is very difficult as it is. Anybody who's driven in the morning or the evening knows there's a significant traffic congestion problem. But looking ahead, the problem gets much, much severe to the point where today we have a peak hour traffic problem in the morning and the afternoon. But over time, the volumes are projected to grow to the point where there will no longer be peaks. There will be just a continuous period of traffic congestion for about 10 hours a day. And you can see that. This chart shows the intersections that connect with the freeway. On the far right-hand side of the chart, whoops, what did I do there? Over here is the Ventura County line. Out here is Winchester Canyon, Goleta. Each of these are the various intersections in the north and southbound direction. And this is the capacity of the freeway, the red line. You know, there's 2 lanes out in Goleta coming back toward Patterson, goes up to 3 lanes to the city of Santa Barbara, and then down to 2 in Milpas. And you can see all of this traffic volume here that's above the 2-lane capacity will create this queue that I was talking about. And it doesn't need to occur in all of those sections. All it has to do is occur at one point in space, and you get a bottleneck that backs up through the entire corridor. So what we're trying to do is to provide capacity to accommodate that, and that's what this additional third lane is intended to do. So even out in 2030, with traffic volumes, you can see this will do a very good job of addressing it, but it isn't sufficient by itself. You know, we went through a very, very long process with the community through the 101 in Motion planning effort, where we came up with a consensus that determined that we needed to widen the freeway with a carpool lane, not just any lane, but a carpool lane to facilitate transit and carpool usage. But we also have to invest in rail transportation and in interregional transit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And frankly, those strategies are what's particularly important for this section. We do not have a solution, a capacity solution for the congestion that's going to grow go within the city limits itself. We have to treat that through alternative transportation, and the carpool lane is really the linchpin of that effort. Dan touched on this very quickly. The project you're looking at today is a subset of item number 4, the fourth phase of our overall strategy to widen the freeway. The first phase is under construction, scheduled to be completed about the end of this year. It's the first 2 miles from Santa Barbara down to Montecito. The second section is actually going to begin construction later this year as well. That project's been fully funded. All the permits have been granted from the Coastal Commission and the City of Carpinteria, the County of Ventura. It's about a $130 million project. We'll begin down at Muscle Shoals and add a carpool lane. For the first time, this is where you'll actually see the diamond lane on the freeway, coming all the way up to Carpinteria Creek. The next phase is in Carpinteria itself. It's phase 3. We have to replace the Linden and Casitas Pass overpasses in order to accommodate the additional freeway lanes into the freeway. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to take what we think are going to be cost savings from the second project. You know, the bid environment is actually pretty good right now because of the recession. So we think we may have as much as $20 million in savings on that project. And we're hoping to get the permission of the California Transportation Commission to apply those cost savings to Carpinteria and sort of take advantage of another opportunity to make sure that project is fully funded and staying on track. We're going to be getting permits from the City of Carpinteria hopefully later this year. All the environmental work is done, and that project is queued up to finish or to begin construction about the time when Phase 2 finishes. So then we're left with the big, long 10-mile section, essentially from Carpinteria back up to the section we're looking at, too. You can see the blue line overlaps with the green line up here in the city of Santa Barbara because we have to come back for the Salinas Ramps project, basically. So what we're hoping to do today, with your permission, is get approval to do that section so that we don't have to come back and redo that work at a later point in time. I mentioned briefly that with this strategy as part of a multimodal solution to the widening to the congestion on the freeway. The HOV lane produces about 65% of the benefit that we're going to need from a traffic reduction standpoint. And primarily that's because we're able to use carpools, van pools, and the interregional bus system that we have in place will be able to use that line. And I'm not sure if you know, but right now today we have the Coastal Express bus service that operates between Ventura County and Santa Barbara County. About 300,000 people a day use that service. It's very successful. There's more than 40 lines that go throughout the whole day and in the weekends. And having that carpool lane in place for the use by these interregional buses is really important for the long-term success of that. You know, people are interested in commuting that way. They want to save money, but if there isn't a time savings from having a carpool lane, it isn't nearly as attractive as it would otherwise be. We're also working with MTD right now to expand that service. We're going to have a proposal going to the MTD board to add 4 additional peak hour buses that would operate as expresses coming directly from Ventura County locations to South County locations in Santa Barbara during the peak hour. And we hope to expand that more as we have more Measure A funds available. We've been working with California Division of Rail. They actually are the folks who operate the Amtrak trains in California. They provide the funding to operate the Surfliner. And the city of Santa Barbara had the great idea to try and retime the existing train that comes into South County. It gets in about 10:20 in the morning and really isn't practical for commuters to use. But we're hoping to have that train retimed to arrive during the peak traffic hour in the morning. And we've gotten very encouraging news from the Caltrans Division of Rail. They're very supportive of this, like to see this happen. Right now we're working with Metrolink and Union Pacific on some of the operational issues, trying to work through those. And in addition, there's a new executive director of the LOSAN, which is the San Diego to Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo rail corridor. And that person was involved in operating the capital trains up in Sacramento, between Sacramento and the Bay Area. And he's got some ideas about dedicated commuter service that might start in Moore Park or Montalvo and come up to Goleta. So we're also looking at those. And then on the TDM side, Caltrans Division of Traffic Solutions, which operates our commuter services program, just recently got a federal grant to initiate a dynamic ride-sharing program, sort of a mobile ride-sharing connection process that you would use on your phone. It's one of just a handful of grants around the country, but it's going to be tested here in the 101 corridor as an opportunity for people who aren't necessarily taking a regular commute trip that would take a carpool in an organized way like that, but are interested in carpooling, on a day-to-day basis. So they can use their mobile application, identify other people who are traveling in the corridor at the same time, and then link those 2 people into a carpool situation. So there's a lot of things going on in the corridor in addition to the 101 widening, but the linchpin for carpools, for van pools, for transit is construction of the 101 freeway. So we'd like to see that happen as fast as possible so folks can benefit from the congestion reduction. I'll stop there. If you have any questions, I can do it now or later. And then Dave Beard has information about the specific project.
Great. We'll be back to you at the end of Mr. Beard's presentation, which and with questions. So, Mr. Beard, how much time do you need?
I believe another 10 minutes or so.
Great.
Thank you, Greg. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, thank you for hearing our project today. My name is David Beard. I am the project manager with Caltrans. And that's for the project currently in construction, as well as this proposal we're bringing to you today here at the northbound side of 101 at Salinas Street ramps. Just for context, I want to talk a little bit about the project that was already permitted. And this is a view looking northbound. First of all, the project currently proposes to keep the two existing northbound lanes and the two existing Salinas Street ramps, the on-ramp and the off-ramp. Leading up to it from Hot Springs would be an auxiliary lane showed in blue there, where people would have to exit. And then leading away from the on-ramp, leading further north up and over Milpas would be the third lane that's proposed as part of the Milpas to Hot Springs project. Now, as you see from that red line, the current design does not leave room to extend that third lane and close that gap at the Salinas Street ramps. So a change like that would be something additional we have to look at. So last spring we received a letter from the Montecito Association, and they pointed out what they saw as the benefits of doing the work to complete that third lane sooner rather than later. Benefits including motorists would enjoy the increased capacity and better traffic flow sooner rather than later, and cost savings most likely to result as well. And so we embarked on this change to the project as a result. So the proposal now involves continuing that third lane from Hot Springs, where it begins, past the Salinas Street ramps, and then continuing northbound. So in order to do that, the Salinas Street ramps that are there currently would have to be reconstructed in order to make room for that to happen. We also would have to replace the concrete drainage channel that's there now with an underground system and take advantage of that room. We would also have to relocate some of the overhead signs and lighting that was installed, as well as the drainage channel. So it would be constructed as a change order on the project that's currently being built, using the contractor that we have on site at a cost of $3 to $4 million. And it would have to begin June 1st in order to take care of the summer construction season, both for constructability and permitting reasons. So the proposal here would be to have those two northbound lanes shown in yellow, a third northbound lane shown in blue, and then in light blue, the reconstructed Salinas Street ramps, which would have to be built closer to the sound wall that was completed. And that's the reason why we'd have to reconstruct the concrete drainage ditch, and also that's the reason why the northbound 101 lanes would have to be shifted to the left into the median of Route 101 to make room for all the extra lane. Now, there'd be real benefits to the public immediately to have this third lane open now rather than much later with the HOV project that Mr. Hart spoke about. The northbound 101 at Salinas Street is the most heavily traveled portion of the two-lane section there. And so it would represent the biggest bottleneck to be overcome. So we'd be eliminating that this year instead of many years from now. Also, the Cabrillo on-ramp is really a much more heavily used ramp, and therefore a more effective place to start the third lane in the near term, in the intervening time before the HOV project comes along. And as the Montecito Association letter pointed out, the people entering from Cabrillo would then not be forced to merge immediately to avoid being forced to exit at Salinas Street. They'd be able to enter on that third lane and remain there. So we have a lot of constraints to overcome in order to complete this work. For example, the sound walls have already been completed with floodgates on them because this whole thing is in a flood zone. And that flood zone you can see there in blue encompasses really the entire project that we're talking about here at Salinas Street. So we have to design this improvement with regard to keeping those gates functional, and we also can't incorporate any other big restrictions in the floodplain. We also need to meet safety expectations for the public, the motoring public using these brand new ramps and lane. We also have to create a maintainable facility for the safety of those Caltrans folks who are out there working hard every day to keep the freeway operating and safe. And finally, the constraint to use our existing right-of-way was mentioned before. You shouldn't think of it as just purchasing property. There's people living immediately on the other side of the wall, low-income housing, very dense housing as well. And so displacing them would be extremely difficult to do. And of course, on the other side of the freeway, we have the railroad, which is also a very tough constraint to overcome. Now, this project incorporates a lot of important safety features, and I wanted to mention them because the issue of design exceptions always comes up. The third northbound lane will definitely be a way to reduce congestion. That would potentially reduce the amount of rear-end collisions and other types of collisions on the freeway. Also, the new ramps we're proposing would be the full lengths that will be required for exiting and entering the freeway safely, which is important considering this is a very busy segment. And then the adequate shoulders there serve a lot of safety functions, not just for workers, but also for the motoring public. For example, the recovery area for people who run out of their lane, ability for emergency vehicles to get to accident sites, and then providing lateral clearance to things like signs and guardrails so that they're hit less often. And of course, we use the shoulders for our maintenance of the pavement as well as the landscaping. The landscaping is definitely not the only reason, but one of many. Also, I thought I should mention sight distance, in other words, the view around the corners, and that's the reason for the modifications we're proposing to the sound walls right at the ends where Salinas Street connects. So all these are intended to meet motorists' expectations that they have for new freeway construction. We completed environmental studies of this additional work in order to back up the original CEQA document and revalidate it for use with the additional work here. We didn't identify any new impacts. Any that we did find could be mitigated on site, and the original permits that we had, through speaking with the various resource agencies, we were able to establish that we can continue to use them or amend them with the conditions still in place. Now, I know planting is a very important issue with this project in the community in general, and I have with me Mr. David Emerson, who is our landscape architect on the project, and he'll take you through the next few slides to describe how we address the issue of planting through the project, and then I'll return.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is David Emerson. I'm the landscape architect for the project. I'd like to run through some of the thoughts behind the planting strategies of the change order project we have before us today. Initially, I'd like to talk about the roadside planting, which is the planting on the outside shoulders of the freeway. The southbound side remains unchanged. This project focuses mainly on changes in the median and changes on the northbound shoulder. So we are able to actually fit planting on the northbound shoulder for almost the continuous length of the change order. And vines on the sound walls were proposed with the original planting plan on the northbound off-ramp side only. And with the since the concrete U-shaped channel is being removed from in front of the sound wall on the northbound off-ramp, we're able to plant vines on that sound wall as well. So the net is an increase in vines on the sound walls. The median landscaping has, as I can briefly touch on, has become narrowed, but we're still able to fit planting throughout the whole continuous project limits. If I could take a moment to describe how the planting is currently planned. From the beginning of the project to Sycamore Creek, or about the beginning of the tennis courts, the existing planted median is 10 feet in width. And it stays at 10 feet in width until it gets to the Salinas Street off-ramps. And from that point, it tapers to 6 feet to conform to the railing on the bridge over Sycamore Creek. The current proposal would change that to beginning at 10 feet by the tennis courts, immediately tapering down to 6 feet at Salinas Street, just before Salinas Street rather, continuing at 6 feet for about a third of that length. And then for the last third, it tapers down to 3.5 and back up to 6 again. So it's not a continuous length of the whole project of 3.25 feet. Actually, it's 3.25 feet, not 3.5. I apologize. And also I have some slides talking about enhanced off-site median planting opportunities that we think are a good solution to help offset some of the increased alterations to the median. And I've got some visual simulations which should help you get an idea of how this will end up looking. Okay, so this is a slide of the most constrained portion of the median. This is the part that I have had challenges in the past dealing with. It's the part where it's 4.5 feet at the widest down to 3 and 3 feet 3 inches. And this continues for about 720 feet long, and it starts at 4.6, tapers down to the 3, and then back up to the 4. And the two sections will give you an idea of how that works with the elements out in the roadway. So it shows you that the distance, as Daniel pointed out, ends up being about 2 feet 8 inches between the two barriers. And this shows how the post is actually a portion of that whole metal beam guardrail assembly. There's a post, a block, and then the beam assembly. So when those are offset, you'll see in the bottom of the plan view, the plants can be tucked in between the post elements. This also shows that as the median does narrow, we have to change plant material, and ending up utilizing plant material that is columnar in nature and also goes along with the closer on-center spacing to provide as high as a vegetative break as we can provide. The next slide will be the enhanced off-site median opportunities. You'll see the blue is the area of the reduced median as a result of this change order. And the green is an area that is a potential we have identified to enhance the median. That's a 10-foot wide section of median between Laguna, or actually closer to Garden, and extends just beyond State, just northbound of State Street. That's a barrier right now which has the adequate width to perform the necessary requirements of the coastal design, parkway design guidelines, but is currently not able to do that because the planting in there, the shrub planting, is quite low, and the soil level is also low. So you're seeing palm trees currently, but you're essentially looking right through onto oncoming traffic. And so I think with an opportunity like this, we can raise the soil level in between the palm trees, plant additional material, and provide some relief, and achieve essentially a well-planted, screened, vegetated median in the downtown core. You'll see also the cyan color, which is the light blue, the area between Milpas and Quarantina. That's an area of planted median that we currently is experiencing some dieback due to an accident in construction. Some valves were hit and some wiring was damaged. That's going to be replaced as part of the construction project. So here are the visual simulations. This is the northbound at the off-ramp, at Salinas off-ramps. So this shows the median in its current permitted condition. It's about 10 feet wide. And the planting is shown, generally in these simulations, planting is shown about 5 to 7 years after planting. That gives us the most representative conditions without being overly cautious or overly optimistic, rather, showing plants at a decent size but not trying to oversell the project. So here we see the full median and the planting on the northbound shoulder at the off-ramp, and you'll see a portion in the foreground which is not landscaped. That is a pull-out area that was created to allow maintenance to maintain the channel. And you'll see the after condition, and you'll notice no vines on the sound wall either. In the after condition, you'll notice that the median planting has become lower, the median gets smaller, the lanes have shifted over, but now since the concrete channel has become undergrounded and over in the shoulder, there is room to plant behind the guardrail and to plant vines on the wall. So it's about the planting conditions are about the same on the outside shoulder as they would be in the median at this location, but we have the addition of vines, so we get a layered effect. We've got the low shrubs behind the ground cover and then the vines on the wall. This is a simulation at the on-ramp. This shows the planting in the median as it's currently permitted. It switches from a toyon to a petite pink oleander. So this is where the existing median starts to narrow, begins its taper, and you'll see Salinas. It's hard to make out, but Sycamore Creek is the bridge is in the distance, and that's where it ends its taper. So the vines in this location are trained up on wire trellises up and over the sound wall gate, the flood wall gates, which are there to provide relief for floodwaters. And there's a row of shrubs in front of that and a brief section of guardrail. The after condition, the planting has moved over. The lanes have moved over, rather. The planting is reduced. We're still able to plant in this triangular area between the on and off ramp, and still able to maintain the vines on the sound wall. and there is room for some small planting also behind the guardrail. And we also have some area that we've identified in the distance there where low palm trees would be able to grow. The similar sort of palm trees that you'll see in the 6-lane section and through Summerlin. So they maintain a height of about the sound wall, so it's just providing another layer of vegetative relief in front of the sound wall. And that concludes my portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. We're about 23 minutes, so if you could wrap up, that'd be
Yes,
great.
I realize. If I could have one more minute to sum up. Thank
Absolutely.
you. So I just wanted to express that this is a significant opportunity right now to respond to the community requests that we've heard to expedite this portion of the widening of 101. We have a contractor currently on the site we've spoken to and is ready to begin the work. We have some funding available as part of the current project that wouldn't otherwise have been available, $2 million worth. SBCAG has been able to offer another $2 million pending their board's action to make sure the project's fully funded. So this, we believe, would make the current operational improvements project even more effective, and we wouldn't have to return later with a future widening project at this location. Motorists would get the substantial improvement in traffic flow very soon instead of waiting 6 years or more for the HOV project. And of course, we should expect substantial savings in construction costs by building it sooner. So in order to do this, of course, we need to get this amendment to the city coastal development permit to make this opportunity become a reality. And so in closing, I just want to express my appreciation to the staff both at SBCAG and the city of Santa Barbara to help make this happen, this permit process in a very short time frame. I know it's been a lot of extra work for them, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. All right. What I'd like to do now is entertain questions from my colleagues of either staff or the applicant. Once we finish those questions, we'll go to public comment, then close the public comment portion, bring it back to the commission for an action of some kind. Ms. Lodge, would you like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe it was Mr. Gullett who made a reference to 0.43 miles, which seemed to be without any, the barriers are 3 feet apart and there's no room for any landscaping at all. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lodge, the 0.43 miles is the entire section that would be reduced in width. So only part of that goes down to 3 feet 3 inches.
And and that width does not. There isn't any room for landscaping in that section. Is that that's
The landscaping is proposed in that section,
Oh, it is.
and it would be maintained. And Mr. Emerson could speak more to what type and what to expect in that landscaping.
okay? Now the ABR was not pleased with what they saw, but there have been some changes. I wonder since they saw it. I wonder if I'd be interested in knowing what the changes are.
Please come on up. Don't be bashful.
Pardon me. The changes were in the outside landscaping in front of the sound walls. We have drainage features. Those walls function as, the floodgates are installed in them, and they have drainage features in front and around them. And so we were just unsure of what was going to happen in there. And with the drainage, the culverts are so low and the terrain is so flat. To get fall, there was a possibility they were going to have to run that drainage, feature right in front of the wall. Well, it turns out that's not the case, so we're able to plant that now.
Okay.
So that's the standard.
And as I understand it, this is something that's going to be happening sometime, if not now, 5 or 6 years down the road. Is that correct? With
The HOV
with the
project
HOV
will face the
project.
same constraints at this location that we currently do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lodge. Is it Mr. Bartlett? Yes. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions. First of all, in the presentation, I realize this is different than what we saw at our last DRT presentation. I certainly appreciate seeing changes since then. I know we're under tight time frames, so that's probably why we didn't reconvene. But with this scenario, with the portion of the median that is narrow, I think it was, 3'3", and then 2 foot something between the two rails, why is it necessary to have a full shoulder lane on either side for maintenance? Could that be maintained from one side of the freeway rather than having shoulders on both sides?
Chairman Bartlett, I can answer that question. The shoulders are for all the reasons I listed above, and they're really necessary in both directions. This is a heavily traveled freeway, and for all the reasons I showed, including vehicles having to avoid accidents or emergency vehicles, or the safety of our maintenance folks without closing lanes to do maintenance, we do need the full 10-foot shoulder in both directions.
So even for maintenance, that can't be done from one side?
No, the shoulder would be used for maintenance of the freeway lanes in both directions, and therefore we would need the full shoulder on both sides.
Okay. And then also in the staff report, there was reference to the fact that by doing the project now, obviously there's certain advantages, both economic and time-wise and reduction of impacts sooner. I understand all that. But there was also reference to the fact that even the future HOV project, which is Phase 4 and put off for several years, that there was no additional opportunity for right-of-way expansion. Can you explain why that opportunity is not out there in the future, and that it would be the same solution as what we have before us today?
Yes, I'm going to ask Mr. Hart to answer that only because he's more familiar with that project compared to this one.
Right.
The problem is that on the south side, there's the railroad right-of-way. We can't buy the railroad right-of-way for these purposes. And on the north side, you're looking at the two different trailer parks that are right there. So as low-income housing, there's an economic justice issue in terms of, basically acquiring private property for purposes of landscaping as opposed to affordable housing.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did a rep from the Montecito Association attend today? Oh, great. Could I ask you a question or two, please? Can you come up?
You could state your name for the record, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Bob Short.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Short.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry that we didn't get more information about your process arriving at this. So could you take just 1 minute or less and describe that for me?
Yes, I can. It may pale under the quality of the analysis you've heard from SB CAG and Caltrans, but the first time we realized that that third lane was not going to go through and would create a traffic impediment and we felt a safety problem was about 5 years ago. And we raised that issue and were told quite flatly that it would require acquiring expensive real estate, and there was no money in the budget to do that. Well, I come into Santa Barbara a lot, and every time I came in and went back home, the sound walls were getting further and further to Salinas. And I began to think, what real estate are they going to buy? So I contacted Mr. Hart, and we went out there and looked all over the site, and he confirmed that there would be no real estate bought, and that yes, there probably was room to put it in, and that we certainly would hope that this solution would come now rather than maybe 10 years from now when we would have the very same solution. So that's not very technical, but that's how it happened.
That's okay. I just was curious how it went through this whole process, and I never heard about it until now. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
I have two more questions. I need to understand a little more about how maintenance is budgeted, because we certainly are looking sad as we're coming through the city these days. So are these plants able to maintain themselves? We're looking at a future without much money right now. So could you address that, please? How you're going to maintain the plantings?
We do have a continuous program of maintaining our plantings. In some areas it does look a little sad, and it's something that Mr. Emerson mentioned, that there was some damage to the irrigation systems and a lot of the palms and other plants died. But in general, we do have continuous funding each year for maintaining our highways, and our maintenance crews respond as well as they can. They have to prioritize safety items versus landscape items and so on to continue to keep it looking good the best they can. So the funding, I think, for that should be continuous despite any troubles that we've been hearing lately And the plantings we're proposing today would be no exception to the rest of the planting that we generally put in and maintain.
All right, thank you. And then I have another question. Maybe you would be the person to answer it. I know that I'm retired now from interior design, but I know on projects that I worked on that often I would specify graffiti-proof paint, which is out there. So is there any possibility that we could perhaps have access to a material like that in coating our sound walls?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we used that technology as well. We used stucco on the walls when they were originally constructed so that paint could be applied in the same color to cover up the graffiti. That we feel is more effective than a graffiti-proof coating, which still requires us to wash the graffiti off and then worry about the paint running off the wall and into creeks and so on. But graffiti is definitely a big concern of ours. That's one of our ways of dealing with it, but our favorite really is to provide planting like vines to cover the entire wall. That's the most effective way to keep graffiti off.
Have you considered plantings such as Cherokee Rose or Natal Plum that really make people stay away?
I'm going to ask Mr. Emerson what he thinks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, we have different stakeholders we have to consider when we're planting material like that. This particular corridor has lots of bougainvillea, and it does have some natal plum in the area around State. And I think from a standpoint of graffiti, they can be very determined and find holes to sneak through and kind of sneak in and still apply the graffiti. But it becomes more of an issue of our maintenance forces do still have to get in there and actively maintain, trim, and prune these materials. So I would say yes, we have them, but I don't think that they function effectively as graffiti control.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gullett, one of your slides, when you were talking about conditions, referenced a landscape maintenance condition. And the only thing I can find that might be that, unless you can show me another one, is on page 7, condition D, where it's not really a condition, it's just a condition that they come up with a plan back to ABR. Is that the only landscape maintenance condition that's part of our conditions?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, yeah, it is condition D that I was referring to, and it says that the landscaping shall be installed and maintained in accordance to the landscape plan, and if it's removed for any reason, Caltrans is responsible for its immediate replacement.
Okay, and that landscape plan is determined by ABR, correct?
It would need to be approved by ABR, yes.
So if somebody had 2 cents to offer to that today, going back to Mrs. Larson's concern also, that this would be a spot to put that in?
Yes.
And then a couple questions on, one question on the slide that showed the type of posts and guardrails. And I understand it's just getting skinnier, and so you showed a before and then you showed an after. The current project that right back there would be good. Not that one, the one with actually where you see the metal from the side. The current project has the same type of guardrail that's approved. All it is a narrowing with the same type of guardrail.
Correct.
There was never going to be, my term, a piece of concrete that's plastered over like the rest as you go farther to town.
Yes, and the reason for that is because of the floodplain issues.
Okay, but it doesn't change the visual. It's just the, well, it could, I guess, but it's really just the shrinkage of the size.
That's correct.
Okay. And are you able also to talk about the wetland mitigation? Is that your area?
Yes.
So the staff report said there's an additional mitigation going on there for another 800 square feet. And I think I read somewhere on the addendum that it's actually you're just going to add that to either a current or prior mitigation project?
It is, it will, I guess it could be considered continuous with the planting plan that we have proposed for that same area. So we're going to plant the banks of Sycamore Creek. We currently have mitigation planting over by the zoo. This would be a continuation of that treatment to the area between the railroad right-of-way and Caltrans
But in a
right-of-way.
new location?
Yes.
Okay, so I was curious there, as I actually asked our Creeks Division, and their concern is actually that there's a public works budget project related to a flood control project coming up next summer that might be in the same vicinity too, and I'm wondering, are they not in the same vicinity? Is that something where you'd plan to make some plantings and the city would come back in and pull those out to do a flood control project?
I'm not aware of the flood control project.
Yeah, Commissioner Jordan, I can comment on that.
Okay.
The city's project is actually north of the freeway along Sycamore Creek, and this is the current proposal from Caltrans for the restoration area, and it's south of the freeway. It's between the railroad right-of-way and the traveled way along the creek. I think the confusion might be that north is down on this.
And then conceptually, I guess, in the big picture, I was wondering, do they have to go ahead and mitigate at that particular spot, or could they, say, give money in lieu of mitigating to Creeks Division to work on a bigger picture restoration in Sycamore Creek at a later time?
We haven't explored that. Mr. Cato or Mr. Vincent might have comment on in lieu fee as mitigation. Part of the reason why an addendum is appropriate for this project is that the wetland impact has been identified before, and there was a mitigation identified before, and this mitigation is similar to that one.
Okay. I guess really the only reason I just bring that up is that Sycamore Creek is an active zone of concern for our city's efforts, and we're just going and finding an 80 by 10 foot spot to mitigate, and how does that fit into the big picture, and could the efforts be better made somewhere else if it was done in concert with the city's program? So it's more of a statement than a question, so I'll just leave that thought with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Lodge, further questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hart, you said that Caltrans can't buy right-of-way on the railroad side. Is that because Union Pacific won't sell, or?
Yes, that's the reason. I shouldn't have said can't. It's just we don't have a willing seller. And we've had a lot of experience in working with the railroad that hasn't been helpful in that regard. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Hart, if you could, I've got one more question, so I think you're the right person to direct this towards. I'm trying to get my arms around the cost acceleration on Caltrans and related projects, and as you know, I've been involved with this 15 years ago, and we had $51 million to spread over the entire corridor from the county line to Milpas, and all of a sudden that's getting completely zapped up by cost increases and what have you. Do you have any percentage numbers in terms of what a 5 or a 10-year delay costs based on past experience in terms of the project budget?
well, that's a great question. I don't have a percentage increase, but I think I can give you something that gives you some parameters about that. When the original proposal that Caltrans had to widen the freeway, which is essentially what we're looking at today, different design, but essentially the same project, Measure D, which was the predecessor to Measure A, had $15 million in it for that project. Now, Measure D, almost 20 years later, Measure A, has $150 million in it for that same project. And the cost of the project back then, total cost was about $100 million. Now it's about $425 million. So the time is very, very important. We've done a lot of scenario planning with the entire Measure A strategic plan to determine, how can we build all these things that we promised the voters over 30 years that we're going to construct. And what we've learned is that by delaying the 101 at all, it significantly inflates the cost beyond the point where over 30 years we'll have enough money to construct it. So time is very important, and we don't frankly know know whether this section of the freeway that we're talking about will be the project that comes up 5 to 7 years from now. As I showed you the chart, we've got 10 miles from Carpinteria all the way up to the city of Santa Barbara to do. When we do the big picture analysis of the cash flow and the opportunities to do that work, we may not find that it's most utilitarian to do this section of the freeway. It may make more sense to extend the carpool lane that's already going to be in place down in the south section further north. So it may be even longer than 5 to 7 years before we get back to this section if we don't take this opportunity now.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions from commissioners, we'll open up the public portion. And I'd like to offer Mr. Zink. Did you want to make a presentation from ABR? And then I'm going to call on Mr. Suding to follow Mr. Zink.
My name is Paul Zink, and I'm the representative for ABR. The chair was not able to make it, and our landscape architect, who was involved in some other meetings, is not able to make it as well. I'm here to say that it was 7-0 that we found the proposal unacceptable. We continued it. We did not deny the project. We wanted to see them come back meeting the guideline standards. And the guideline standards are talking about enhanced landscaping. They have since done that, but we haven't seen that. The additional landscaping along the sound wall, that's fabulous. But we didn't see that, okay? The main point that I want to bring to you today is the narrowing of the 6 feet to 3 feet and putting a bush in between and asking it to grow. And think of the footing that has to be around the steel I-beam that supports the guardrail and how they're going to be staggered with a bush in between and say, now grow. We're looking at taking what was supposed to be 6 feet and making it 3 feet. That's 18 inches per side. Now, if you look at the Montecito Association letter, they say, given that Caltrans engineers will not apply for design exceptions, we're asking for 18 inches on each side. You've got a 10-foot shoulder for maintenance. Could that be 9'9"? And then if you do that, can you narrow each lane by 3 inches, and then the other shoulder on the other side, narrow that by 9 inches, and before you know it, you can maintain our median at 6 feet. 6 feet is also narrow, but that's what was decided upon a long time ago, and now we're making it less. So we have to hold our ground. We're an aesthetic board, and we're saying this is not appropriate. These poor plants trying to grow in between these I-beams that have concrete footings don't stand a prayer, and maybe won't look very good as you zip on down. You're looking at 0.43 miles of this. Why can't we narrow and do some magic with some of the line painting? If we've all been through LA, we know what it's like. Sometimes you're next to a sound wall, sometimes you're not. There is some flexibility there. We did not see any flexibility. So I would like to say that there is an opportunity where we can have enhanced landscaping and we can have some design exceptions. So with that, our board is not okay with the presentation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could clarify a statement. The approved project actually has a 10-foot wide median from Sycamore Creek to the Cabrillo Hot Springs interchange. It's not 6 feet. 6 feet was analyzed in the EIR, but the addendum that changed the project looked at 10 feet. So it is 10 feet. It's not 6 feet.
Thank you. Mr. Suding, to be followed by Beth Collins-Brigard.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'll be honest with you. This area of redesign is not even in the Historic Landmarks Commission district, but I was appointed to the DRT and I reviewed it. I brought it back to the Commission. The Commission felt very passionate about no reduction in the median landscape, so that's why I'm here. A reduction in the median width at this location, according to page 21 of the guidelines, is unacceptable. It should be 10 feet. That's what it says, 10 feet. It's difficult to sustain plant material in this narrow of an environment, and this narrow of a planter in a harsh freeway environment, just as Mr. Zink said. The off-site median landscape, it's not a solution. To plant more shrub material a mile down the freeway is not a solution. It should be done. It should be something that should be done anyway. It should be planted anyway. The Historic Landmarks Commission considers this part of Highway 101 an important gateway to Santa Barbara and an important historic corridor. As such, the proposed project is not supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, fine. Ms. Collins-Bergen?
Yes, hi. I'm Beth Collins-Burgard. Good afternoon, Commissioner and Chair. I represent Santa Barbara Sunrise RV Park. I'm from Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, and Schreck. We are the first business west as you exit the Salinas exit. So a few comments, please. First, the Santa Barbara Sunrise RV Park has been operating for years in this location. Before the last phase of the Caltrans project, many of our clients were nurses working at the hospital temporarily, many on night shifts. The last Caltrans construction project significantly impacted my clients' goodwill and business. They are still recovering. Nurses working nights could not sleep during the day due to construction noise. Vacationers weren't interested in staying next to the construction site. Now that the noise wall has finally been complete and we are back up and running and trying to improve our reputation and goodwill, there's a proposition for yet more construction. This construction will once again significantly impact our business. We were partially compensated for our losses during the last project, but there's no such proposal for compensation for our inevitable losses during this project. Additionally, there are CEQA impacts that I'd like to discuss. Construction. Construction will result in new construction impacts, noise, dust, vibration, traffic. They will significantly impact the people living and working in the area. The reduction of the sound wall and the loss of, or the reduction of this dedicated exit lane, or the change of that exit lane. The proposed reduction of the sound wall will expose the manager's office and at least one RV space. Right now, it's blocked by the sound wall. This will allow unmitigated noise from the freeway into the park, altering the mitigation from the previous project. The new project also will reduce the buffer landscaping and move high-speed traffic even closer to the park, increasing noise impacts. The new configuration of the turnoff and exit from a dedicated traffic lane will also put people in those buildings in the park at risk for runaway vehicles running into the area and killing or injuring them. With the current configuration, there already have been multiple accidents. This new configuration, where the exit will be off of this lane, and there's a change in the curve that's being proposed, and that reduction of the sound wall that's there, that creates an obvious visual warning as somebody's leaving and exiting the freeway. Changing those will then increase these risks even higher. This is a significant environmental impact that must be considered, which has not been. Exiting RVs currently exit right there. You can see the exit right close to Salinas. With the reconfiguration, it appears that RVs are going to have to swing out and possibly into opposing traffic to be able to exit and get onto the freeway in order which they've been doing for years, but with this reconfiguration, it creates this new hazard. To avoid this hazard, RVs are going to end up traveling through the residential neighborhoods next to the freeway, resulting in traffic noise, air quality, and other impacts that haven't been considered. We also have the loss of landscaping that we've heard about. Aesthetic impacts from proposed changes to landscaping and noise wall have not been adequately analyzed. The changes constitute a significant aesthetic and land use impact. The changes also do not comply with local aesthetic policies or procedures, and as we just heard, they're not approved by the ABR or the HLC.
Could you wrap up, please?
Okay, quickly. The proposed additional landscaping near Laguna Street still must be reviewed by ABR and HLC, so it's unclear if anything would ultimately be approved. That constitutes deferred mitigation, and any mitigation should be one-to-one. The mitigation proposed not sufficient. The new landscaping, the two blue gum eucalyptus and oaks, those two types of plants don't grow well together. Eucalyptus are a major fire hazard and can be blown down easily. This hasn't been analyzed. Let's see. Staff acknowledges issues regarding the modification in the landscaping and suggests changing findings and conditions, but they don't make clear what those changes would be, and there's no adequate opportunity for the public to comment. The wetlands impacts, new mitigation, but not sufficient opportunity for us to consider and review as we would have been with an EIR. Growth-inducing impacts. There's been no analysis about how this moving up the timetable 5 to 10 years even will result in growth-inducing impacts.
I'm going to need to have you finish up here.
My last three little points are the materials that are available for public review, and there's even an example of that in the presentation today. There's no plan that adequately shows a comparison of what has currently been approved, what is proposed, and there's no overlay. You can't tell what the changes are that are being proposed. The plans do not adequately show just how the reconfigured exit are going to impact the curve and impact the safety of that area. They cut off too close to the 101.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up and sit down, please.
Okay,
We're
thank you.
out of time.
And so please, I ask you to deny this project, and we need more transparency, and we need full CEQA analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Pat Kistler with the Carpenter Chamber of Commerce, to be followed by our last speaker, Mr. Bob Short, if you need to make additional comments.
Good afternoon.
Kistler.
Pat Kistler from the Carpinteria Chamber. I'm here for the Carpinteria Chamber whose board met yesterday and decided that they did want to support this project. As you know, being in Carpinteria, we are always at a challenge with traffic going either way. And any sooner that this can be relieved a little bit will help our community and will also help our people that are working in Carpinteria and or Santa Barbara getting back and forth. We realize that there's going to be problems with it because there's always problems when you try to put together a solution. But we would prefer to see it happen sooner than later, and you have a letter from us, and I don't need to go through all that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Short, do you have any additional comments to add?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. The Montecito Association has historically been concerned with beautification, and it's one of our major issues, both in Montecito and throughout the corridor. However, in this instance, it is clear to us from all the research we've done that if this project isn't approved now, maybe 10 years from now, when the project's approved, it will be the same one. There appears to be no indication that in any way it could be changed. And as a matter of fact, Caltrans is currently designing this major portion of the new HOV lane, and if this isn't approved, it'll be just plunked into that design. So in spite of the reduction in landscaping, we strongly urge you to approve this now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the commission? Seeing no one coming up, I'll close the public portion and bring it back to the commission for some discussion. And Mr. Jordan, would you like to lead us off, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a couple more questions. Mr. Gullett, in regard to the points that were just brought up, and in looking at that picture on the movement of the sound wall, the way the curve will be, same thing. We had these nice plans that really didn't, they kind of showed what was there now, and a whole other set showed what we think was going to be there, and the applicant's presentation today just kind of showed colored lines placed over a photograph. Is there a process by which the change in location of sound walls and how that affects people on the ground and the change in the on-ramp and off-ramp look gets reviewed by the city, or does that just move forward and get determined by Caltrans?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, in this case, because Caltrans is the lead agency for CEQA, and because the ramps and all the geometry of the intersection and the freeway have to conform to Caltrans standards, Caltrans has adjusted all the designs. So this is the plans you have before you are the plans that staff has, and staff also has the plans for the approved project, which we've looked at. Mr. Beard may have more comment on what the actual geometric changes to the on-ramp are and how that affects the sound wall and potentially affects Sunrise RV Park.
Well, before I hear from him, I guess the context of my question would be that there's more consideration here than a CEQA issue. There's other considerations that are particularly relevant to the city that need our approval today. So it's certainly relevant, in my mind, to ask for better information than sitting in front of us. Okay, thank you.
If I may, I just want to comment on some of the issues that were brought up. We did provide a more detailed mapping to the city that just don't go well on a screen here, but they showed a lot more detail, similar to what was asked for. But I do want to reassure the folks from Sunrise about the off-ramp and the sound wall, that the two locations that were cited as having increased noise are actually exposed to Salinas Street already. I wouldn't think that there'd be any change in just shortening the very end of the wall when the rest of it would all be left alone. So the issue of disturbance and extra noise, I think, doesn't really rise to the level anyone would notice. And as far as the danger of runaway vehicles on the off-ramp, I think that what we're proposing here would actually reduce that potential in a couple ways. First of all, we'd be increasing the length of the off-ramp, meaning that people would have more time to slow down for the corner. We'd be improving the sight distance around the curve at the end of it so that people would be able to see if there were RVs pulling in or out of Sunrise. And by not having a lane end at the off-ramp, but having people able to continue instead of being forced to exit, I think also could actually reduce the potential, if there is any, for a runaway vehicle to overrun that curve on the off-ramp. So I think we'll see an improvement.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I think my other question, I think, is for Mr. Beard, too, and that has to do with the exception. And I don't understand the exception process. I think there was a note in the staff report that exceptions take time to run through the process, and I guess I'm a little ruffled by the fact that the state says they want to take time to actually come back and issue either a declination or acceptance of a formal exception, but is willing to pass down the burden to the city to make a quick decision because the funding may go away. So I'd like to hear more about that process and why we haven't really gotten a definitive answer on whether an exception would be granted or not. It's just secondhand.
Okay, let me clarify that then. The design exceptions we're referring to mean deviations from the established safety standards, engineering-wise, for what a roadway requires. And I don't think we've made a time issue out of it. Yes, they do take time, and we're justified we take the time to do those. But really it has to be a justification based on cost and a good reason why we would compromise those safety standards in a way that the public would understand and could be defensible in court later. And standards like shoulder width, lane width, and sight distance are among the most important to be maintained consistently across the state. It's expected of us by the motoring public. And when there's problems with the roadway, usually the design standards are scrutinized very closely to see if they contributed to an unsafe situation. So for that reason, we aren't considering them for this project, and it's not because of the time constraint, it's just because engineering-wise and safety-wise, that's the right decision.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Beard, since I tried to catch you before you sat down. But would not the median width also be included in safety design standards? I mean, wider median, I would think, would add to safety rather than reduce it.
The portion that's paved, the shoulder certainly does. The portion beyond that where the planting is...
I'm talking about in the center median.
Right. Well, the area inside the barriers is really not a safety issue. The barriers themselves are adequate to prevent cross-median accidents regardless of the width of that unpaved portion of the median. So the width wouldn't contribute to a safer situation.
Okay. And then can you elaborate a little bit more on the time issue associated with the exploration of these design reductions, or what do we call them? Exceptions. I mean, you said it would take time. How much time would that take if we were to entertain a potential exception?
Well, they often, in my experience, take a year or more, especially when we have to really, really hunt for a justification that's not apparent at first. So,
and then the explanation that I heard to my earlier question about the land acquisition is that the land acquisition couldn't happen because it's not just to displace low-income housing when it's to accommodate landscaping, but really this whole project is to accommodate the extra lane. We had the landscaping. It's the lane that's causing the justification for land acquisition. Is that not correct?
well, I think you have to look at the whole corridor and the various parts of it, the planting, the lanes. They're all in there to different extents.
Right, but what has changed from the approved project is the additional lane. It isn't because we're asking for more landscape, it's because we're asking for more paving that you would need the more land, right?
Really, it has more to do with reconstructing the ramps at Salinas Street and how to do that properly in the space that it takes to do those.
Okay. And then I have a question for Mr. Short from the Montecito Association, if you would indulge me for a second. Well, we appreciate, obviously, you're bringing this to the attention in a still timely fashion such that we can at least deal with it. I guess my question to you is both about the past and the future. Did the Montecito Association support the 3-laning of the freeway when it was proposed through Montecito in the past, and what position will you take in the future with the 3rd lane that is going to be proposed through Montecito for the high occupancy vehicle lane?
I've only been involved with the association for about 6 years. I can't recall every past position they've taken. I can tell you absolutely we support the 3-laning throughout the corridor.
Okay.
We feel it's essential for safety and traffic.
I mean, that's good to hear, because that was one reason I was hoping that this project would be linked with that's in Montecito, so that we don't provide this now and then later on we're held hostage and we can't get the 3rd lane through Montecito.
Oh, no, sir. So, I can guarantee we'll support it.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Appreciate it.
Okay, are there any other questions at this point? Okay, why don't we move into our discussion and deliberations here. Ms. Larson, would you like to start us out? Or?
Oh, sure. I appreciate what I appreciate about this is that, first of all, the Montecito Association shares our appreciation of aesthetics. I want to say that first off. Second of all, I'm surprised to see this here today without having gone, because we only have to notice something for 10 days back to ABR for ABR really to have a look at this. And I find that disappointing. I also feel that there's something very minimizing about this in terms of landscape and in terms of regard for the amenity and aesthetic of Santa Barbara. And I'm very, very, very concerned with that regard. And even though, and I appreciate we have letters from all the chambers of commerce, we have many letters from many chambers that came as public comment, and I appreciate that. But the aesthetics draw people to Santa Barbara as much as anything else. And I just can't understand why an extra 30 days for reviewing properly in a public forum wouldn't do this project good. So I'm struggling with an approval. We're reducing landscape. We're reducing, I don't see a study of, say for instance, going south, the view, is that going to be changed to, you don't have to get up and answer this, this is my rhetorical question at this point, the view of the Montecito Country Club, for instance, or the views of the mountains by the sound walls. I don't know. But so far what I've seen with the sound walls has been disappointing. And we have a huge palette for graffiti here now. And it's being very industriously applied like a full-time job by somebody practically. And so it's taking a full-time job for another person to walk around behind him to remove it. But we don't have the willingness to apply a coating that would stop that. So I'm just very concerned that I'm very concerned that this hasn't had sufficient review, and it has the appearance of like an end run around our boards and commissions by coming here directly. We rely on the boards and commissions for their advice and for their deliberations. I'm not a landscape architect, although when I first saw all this, I was on ABR, so it's not like this is foreign to me. And at that time, it was thoroughly vetted and really checked. And it's undergone change since then. I appreciate that. There's some need to move for expediency. I appreciate that. But there are some things that need to proceed in a timely fashion, and that includes review. So I can't support this today. I really want to, but I can't support it today. And if I were going to ask for something, I'd ask for a continuance so it could be looked at. So that I can't make a decision today that is going to affect Santa Barbara forever. This pavement is not going to go away. These distances are going to last for a long time. They'll only shrink. They'll never grow for landscape. And looking at the condition of the city as we drive into it today, I can't go for it. So I would ask, when it comes time for my vote, the only thing I would consider voting for is a continuation. And and at that point, I would ask the city staff to put it on a fast track, but definitely to be studied by the boards and commissions that really have the opportunity to take a look, and have the boards and commissions know that it's a fast track so that they can respond in like fashion and not say, oh, we'll see you again in 2 months, or none of that, but really have it looked and have it fully vetted. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Mr. Bartlett, is your light on?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I would like to preface my comments as having been actively involved on the 101 DRT for almost 7 years. My first 3 years was, under the jurisdiction of the ABR, and then I remained on that committee once I joined Planning Commission, and I've found Caltrans actually be really a pleasure to work with over that time. And I think we've accomplished a lot with what's been achieved to date. I think they've been willing to listen and make changes and exceed perhaps a lot of the expectations that we all had going into all these improvements. And in fact, I recall being very involved in bringing up the issue as to why we were doing all these improvements and not making the northbound Milpas Bridge 3 lanes, to the point where we would have to come back later and tear up that whole interchange. So luckily, the team was able to get that into the budget and include it in the project, and it really extended that 3-lane further south. So I'm totally on board with the program of this project, and I think as are all the chambers of commerce from the different cities. So there's no issue there. I have more of an issue with the proposal as I do with the program. The design guidelines, the very cover of which is the very image that we're talking about, of looking from the southbound lanes across this beautifully lush median up to the Montecito Country Club. And it kind of violates the spirit on which the guidelines were developed for this project. And I know we're under the gun timing-wise and budget-wise, and that's why we're all feeling rushed, but it really kind of violates the spirit of those guidelines. And I think even the EIR analyzed a 6-foot median, and we've gone from 10 down to 3'3", and I'm not feeling comfortable moving forward without the support of ABR, without the support of Landmarks Commission, and I just feel like we're being rushed. I know expediency is critical because we all want the cost savings, we all want the benefit of the increased flow on the freeway. I mean, that's not the issue, but I wish that, over this last, it's been, 10 months since this was brought up by Montecito Association, that we could have at least explored or gone further down the path with some of these design exceptions that would at least hold part of this landscape that's been so valuable all along into the project. And I would still hope that there's a way we can do that. If we can't acquire more land, I wish there could be a simultaneous application to see if there's any easing of shoulder or lane widths or anything that would try and get us back to that 6 feet as was expressed by Mr. Zink. So I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say as well before I make my final decision. I'm certainly on board with the intent of the project. It's just this particular proposal is troubling at this moment. So I'll ponder it some more while I hear the other comments.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Jordan, and then Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I probably have some shared feelings from both Commissioner Larson and Commissioner Bartlett, and I agree with Commissioner Larson's feeling that probably the best choice would be to bring it back. I also wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Bartlett that I'm on board with getting that third lane in and getting it done. I'm really concerned about this exception issue, and it really, I think, just speaks to credibility of the way this project has been put in front of us. And I can't think of it any other way, that the burden for making a quick decision is ours, and that same burden doesn't exist at the Caltrans process. To at least let people know unequivocally that you could not get back to a 6-foot median by shrinking the inches on both sides of the freeway. It's because it's clear to me that that's the foundation of what this process is sitting on, that you can't do it now, and you're not going to do it when you said you were going to do it years from now either. And really, to me, it comes down to then we make a decision, a landscaping decision based on do we want the third lane or not. And I would pose to the rest of you, while you're thinking about this too, that the guidelines are just directly in contradiction of ever putting a third lane in there anyhow, and that the traditional view of a lush and welcoming landscaping coming into Santa Barbara is time gone by, perhaps too. We need to start looking at another method of making a welcoming, nice entrance to Santa Barbara. We don't control the maintenance. We don't control the financing on the maintenance, and yet we have these guidelines that mandate it's going to be there and done by somebody else. And you guys have already made reference to it. You can go drive down Garden right now, and the palm trees, for every green palm they have up, they have 10 frayed brown palms sitting down. There's weeds growing out of the median, and there's weeds growing out of the pavement. So it's clear already that the maintenance is not being taken at the level we would like it to be already. And if we ourselves don't control that issue going forward, it seems to me we've lost pretty much the reason of the argument, unless we can control that issue going forward. So I'm going to sit on that fence on whether to go forward. I would like to see some type of move towards a better maintenance condition or a set of instructions down to ABR on how that would work. I would like to see the exception resolved, if there was any support for that, on moving expeditiously to get an exception ruling to let us know where we would stand, and/or I would just like to see it go back through the review boards and come back to us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question first. In this visual simulation, sorry. Try to stimulate my brain to try to get some way around this, because I basically share the concerns that have been expressed already about the landscaping and the whole idea. This is an entry to the city of Santa Barbara, and the idea was that there was to be the kind of landscaping that would be welcoming and contribute to the beauty of Santa Barbara. In this simulation, what's the width of the median at that point?
That's the 6-foot median right there.
6 foot?
6 feet, yeah.
Okay, and so how long again is the section where it's a lot less?
I think it's 720 feet. And during that 720 feet, the width is varying from 4.5 to 3, back to 4.5. So the 3.25 is just a moment, is just the very minimum, and it's constantly changing. So that's where the pinch is down, and then it flares back out. Does that answer your question?
Okay, yes. So it's about a half mile of in and out.
It's about...
You said 700 feet?
700 feet. Yeah, so a little more than a tenth.
Yeah. Well, that's not quite so bad as it's all being the narrowest part. Because I'm also concerned about, in that narrow part, I believe it was Mr. Suding who brought up the point of, how are you going to get a shrub to grow there when there's so little land for it to grow in? Well, all I can say is, as Commissioner Larson has suggested, that this come back.
Can I make a brief statement, please? Sure. We have to comment that the posts were set in concrete, and that's not the case. The posts are set in soil because the intent with how guardrail functions is it's supposed to give when it's hit by a car. So the car, as opposed to hit, it's pulled out and a new one is driven right back into its place.
And these are Thrive beams you're putting in as a part of that? Okay.
But the posts would be the supports for the Thrive beams. Is that correct? Okay. Well, that makes it a little better. Well, I guess I would hope that if the Planning Commission can't approve it as is, and it makes great sense to do this now. If it's something that's going to happen later, certainly it makes great sense to do it now as part of the existing project. I'm just hoping that there's some way that you can make some improvements to the landscaping and come back to us.
Thank you, Ms. Lodge. I know Mr. Bartlett has more to say on this matter, but I'll try to weigh in on this piece. I truly appreciate and understand the comments that have been raised by my colleagues, and I think that aesthetics along this portion of the corridor has been a community issue for as long as 101 has been around, it seems. And Caltrans has really struggled through this whole community process, and the design process that we're working with today is an extension of that. And it would be nice if we could get some more landscape, but I understand this project is caught between a rock and a hard space. And the rock is Union Pacific, and the hard space is the sound wall and the mobile homes to the north of this piece. And so there's not a lot of flexibility if we want to go forward with this project. And I think the aesthetic issues raised by all of the commissioners here are important, and that an ABR or additional aesthetic review would help this project get the last pieces put in place. But I'm of the mind that there are some overriding considerations that warrant this project being approved and pushed forward. I don't feel like I'm being rushed, having watched this project get designed for about 15 years now. I think it is. I'd like to see it happen for a number of reasons, not the least of which are noise, air quality, improved commute times for those who have to travel to the south and to the east every day and come in every morning to work here in Santa Barbara. So I think the mobility issue is important. This is a state highway, and it carries not just Santa Barbara and local traffic, but statewide traffic. And I think that's something we as locals have to deal with here, is that there is some other folks who use this as well. We would all like them to come into town, appreciate the aesthetics and the character and all the things that make Santa Barbara a great city. And at the same time, we're dealing with some major cost control issues. The more we wait, the more those costs are going to skyrocket. And if Mr. Hart's figures are correct, by delaying this to 5 to 10 years to get the same result, that is a huge price tag to pay for the aesthetics of a section of road that it will take, I've calculated, approximately 13 seconds to drive through. If we're talking 700 linear feet of median and you're going 60 miles an hour, it takes you about 13 to 15 seconds to go there. Now, that's not to discount the fact that aesthetics is important, but in the big picture, I think we have to weigh all these factors and be aware that we really can't go much wider, and that Caltrans may not be able to make the compelling argument for an exception or whatever the process is called that requires them to justify why they would put Caltrans workers at risk in this particular stretch. So I would be encouraged by a conversation that would lead to continuing this project to ABR or the design review, but at the same time give the project strong support so that the applicant and the folks associated with the applicant have a clear indication from us that on balance we think this is a good project, that it should be approved, in the very near future so that we can get on with it, save some costs in the construction process, and not extend this process at undue cost and grief to the folks who live here and who use the freeway. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I appreciate hearing everybody's comments, especially yours, I think, summarizing. We all know the importance of this, and again, I'm certainly not opposed to the premise of the project. It's just getting these design details worked out, and I'd like to see it move forward as well, but I would certainly feel more comforted knowing that the ABR and HLC have been integrated one more time. They have not had a chance to really review the landscape that was presented to us today, and I think that would be valuable. I do resonate with some of the comments that I heard from Commissioner Jordan, and I think that part of the benefit coming out of this accelerated schedule and accelerated benefit that is a result of this project should be plowed back into a beefed up maintenance requirement on the landscape and or maybe more mature landscape when it's initially installed, or something to really, you know, let's put that savings where we really need it, and right now it's to beef up that minimal landscape. So I think if we could move toward a brief continuance that would allow one more trip to ABR and landmarks and come back so that we can try and maintain this construction schedule, that would be the direction that I'd be leaning in. So I'd like to see if others will help us get it there. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Bartlett. I'm just curious, in listening to your approach, I understand it's important to get additional ABR review and comment on this. Whether that is going to change the physical constraints that we're having to face here, I think is uncertain, and I'm wondering if there is, and I'm just asking this to ask the question, is there any support to craft a motion that would greenlight this project contingent upon some type of additional ABR review, so that to the maximum extent possible the project could not have to go around the block one more time when in fact we've heard most of what we're going to hear.
Right, to not come back here.
That's
again.
correct.
Right.
That's a question to the commission, and
yeah.
I'll recognize Mr. Hart for a couple of minutes before we talk.
The only thing I'd like to add is that we fully intend to go back to ABR after your decision. I mean, that is the process. We need to still have an approved landscaping plan from ABR. But I think the chair is exactly right. You know, we physically are constrained. That is the problem. Now, we are absolutely happy and willing to work with ABR and the plant palette and all the other issues that we could, you know, work out with them. But ultimately, we don't have a way to go back to ABR, change the physical parameters of the project, and come back to you. That this is the rock and the hard place that we're in.
Well, Mr. Chair, then, to answer your question, I would be willing to have it move forward today with the stipulation that we know we are going to get the extra review after ours by ABR.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like Mr. Bartlett's suggestion in particular. I'm not a landscape guy by any means, but in particular the instructions down to ABR for more mature landscape than would maybe normally be put in a new project, so that the results on the ground are much more obvious quicker. And if there could be other thoughts on those in that kind of vein too for instructions to ABR, I'd be supportive of moving it forward as long as those type of considerations were given to ABR and they had the last say in that manner.
Others? Ms. Larson?
I wouldn't disagree with that, and I appreciate Mr. Bartlett saying the program being different from, because I do understand the need, and I don't want to hold up anything that would save the state significant money, and that state is us. So the bottom line. So I do, and for many reasons, for fuel conservation, for everything. It's just that we. And I say this with all my heart, we have been so careful and conscious of Santa Barbara as a special and unique place. And we appreciate it when we have cooperation from agencies such as Caltrans. And we have been able to work with Caltrans on many, many issues that have preserved aesthetic value to Santa Barbara. And any softening, trees, we've lost so much now, and we all feel it. So what I'm asking is that with that knowledge, because people tell me this as they come in and out of town, and so it's very important to the city to have that gateway, to have things looking good. So we really need that, and it will be great for everybody's mental health. It'll be great for the city, and you know, I travel all over the state. Often, I go down by San Diego County. There's all kinds of nice things Caltrans does. I mean, the beach communities, lovely stuff. We should be no different. We're just special, and we like things like sandstone and palm trees. But that's what makes us different. And to celebrate what makes Santa Barbara different is a good thing. So with that, I want to make a motion to, I don't know how to bifurcate this, though. So I need help, Mr. Chair, or Bruce, somebody. I would like to make a motion to approve the program for the third lane and make the findings necessary. However, included in this motion is a return to ABR and HLC for reviews of, with the understanding that these boards must make a decision, and that say, I want to pick a reasonable time, 30 days, 60 days, I don't know, I can't set a schedule for the boards, but a reasonable time for turnaround on decisions, and so that we do know that our views are saved and that the landscape is adequate. Is there anything else I have to do?
Ms. Larson, just looking at the application itself,
yes.
It is for a coastal development permit, so
that was
I
the
think
stickler for me.
Yes, it is. I know that.
Oh,
so I'm
shoot.
just being the deliverer of
You're right.
Reality here.
You're
but
right.
Let's
so I can't make
dig
my
in
motion.
a little deeper and see what we
yes,
can do.
no, you're right. I cannot make the finding, though, for that. So I withdraw my motion.
Okay.
You have my sentiments, though.
I have one last comment to make before someone makes a motion, and that is to kind of reinforce what Mr. Jordan said about this 8-inch by 8-inch restoration process. I'll call it facetiously, between the tracks and the hardscape. I really think that that's something that I know it's a continuity thing to try to link everything together, but I think it would be much better placed either upstream, if that's within the jurisdiction or the reach or the mitigation capacity of the applicant, or SBCAG, or both. But that would certainly give me a much better feeling in terms of just kind of finishing off this project without putting it through another lap around the block. Mr. Jordan.
Well, I'm not making a motion, but my little pea brain just thought of another item for ABR, just to put it out there for comments. And one of the responses to the existing landscaping and how it looked poorly was the loss of some irrigation equipment. And so one of my suggestions to ABR would be that they have a discussion concerning this and the other stretches of the city landscaping areas maintained by Caltrans on conditions and protocols when equipment goes down and how quick it needs to be repaired and or dead landscaping replaced. So I'll just throw that into the mix also.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Well, we have Ms. Larson, who's not prepared to make a motion. Mr. Jordan is not prepared to make a motion, and I can't make a motion being chair. So I'm looking for somebody else to step up to the plate, and it appears to be Mr. Bartlett.
Okay, my turn. Okay, well, listening to all the different issues. Do we need, at this point, if we're not happy with the off-site mitigation that was proposed, identify the new area that we're thinking of, or just describe it as another beneficial opportunity that we would prefer other than what's before us?
From my perspective, it would be to, in generic terms, identify another area that might yield greater habitat improvement value, something like that. Because this piece is not really a part of a connected string of habitat here. It's really caught in between another rock and a hard spot. Mr. Hart.
We would be happy to work with the Creeks Division on an alternative site location that would be preferable. We're just trying to mitigate the impact.
Sure, I understand.
We want it to be the most beneficial to the city that it can be.
Great.
Chair Joseph, I'm confused now. Are you talking about the wetland mitigation, or are you talking about the enhanced landscaping that's proposed on that section of Highway 101 between Laguna and just past State Street?
No, just a little square of wetland.
The wetlands. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Rehab between the freeway apron and the tracks.
Okay, so
You have the floor.
All right. So I would like to craft a motion to make the findings outlined in the staff report for the CEQA findings that are required, the coastal development permit findings, with the stipulation that alternate off-site mitigations for the wetland mitigation that was included in the project be explored to find an area that is more appropriate in terms of the overall benefit to the Sycamore Creek riparian area, and that with the understanding that the project will be returning to both the Architectural Board of Review and HLC for further consideration on increased landscape opportunities, both in terms of quantity and quality within the given physical constraints that are being approved by the Planning Commission today, with the intention being to hopefully really increase quality, quantity, and maintenance opportunities.
Thank you. Mr. Gullett.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification on the design review jurisdiction. This is all in the Architectural Board of Review jurisdiction, and none of it's in HLC.
Okay, you can strike that on HLC, then.
But your commission may want to consider sending it back to the design review
for a
team.
courtesy review, perhaps. I would change that to a courtesy review as long as that doesn't upset our timeline that we're seeking to achieve.
And I'm sorry, Commissioner Bartlett, perhaps another revisit by the design review team rather than HLC to continue the familiarity with the project.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
I'll second that.
Motion is second. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just make sure that staff provides notes of the discussion points that were made prior to this to ABR as part of the direction.
Chair Joseph, we'll make them watch the video.
That would be painful, wouldn't it?
You will make them watch the video. That sure instills public service, doesn't it? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Without any further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
No.
Motion passes 3-2. This is appealable to the City Council within 10 days. So there we have it. And let's, is it the pleasure of the Commission to take a short break or to continue on? I'm indifferent to that. Let's take a 5-minute stretch and reconvene at 3 o'clock.
Say, Daddy, what that there? And what that over there? And oh, Daddy, oh, hey, Daddy, say what that say up there? Say what they doing there? And why they going there? And Daddy, can I have that big elephant over there? Say who that in my chair? And what she doing there? And oh, Daddy, oh, hey, look at the cowboy coming there. And can I have a pair of boots like that to wear? And Daddy, can I have that big elephant over there? My quizzical kid, now he doesn't want anything here. He's forever demanding to know who, what, and why, and where. Inquisitive child, sometimes the questions get wild. Like, Daddy, can I have that big elephant over there? Don't wanna comb my hair and wear my teddy bear. And oh, Daddy, oh, hey, Daddy, can I go over there? Say, Daddy, what's a square? Where do we get air? And Daddy, can I have that big elephant over there?
Okay, we'll now call the Planning Commission meeting back to order. And we have Mr. Ledbetter here to kick things off for us on our second agenda item. And it was a request by the chair to have a discussion about the status of the Plan Santa Barbara process and all of the administrative corollaries that go along with that as it pertains to the commission and their subcommittee, et cetera. So I have a short presentation to make, but I thought Mr. Ledbetter could kick things off.
Thank you, Chair Jostis, members of the Planning Commission. My name is John Ledbetter, Principal Planner. I'm in charge of the Plan Santa Barbara process. As Commissioner Jostis said, I'll just give you a very quick verbal briefing on what's transpired at the Council since November 16th. As you'll recall, at the November 16th meeting, there were not a super majority of votes in order to pass Plan Santa Barbara. So at that point, the Council asked that the ad hoc subcommittee that had been established in November continue its work into the new year. And with that, they replaced outgoing Councilman Doss Williams with Councilman Bendy White. We met subsequent to that, both in January and February, the ad hoc subcommittee, and the focus of those two meetings were really mostly around density and design, with a particular focus on looking at unit size and building sizes. So what would be the implications? What would any increase in density versus reduction in unit size, what would that look like in terms of buildings? So staff developed a number of examples, both from existing buildings and from prototypes that were designed from scratch, if you will, to help illustrate that point. The subcommittee had asked us to consider in these examples some larger larger unit sizes than were originally proposed by the Planning Commission. So, for example, the Planning Commission had recommended for the medium high, in order to get the highest density there, that the unit sizes be limited to 800 square feet. And the subcommittee asked us to look at larger units at 1,200 square feet for those greater densities. And similarly, for the high density, instead of 600 square foot units, to look at 900 square foot units. So in doing so, what was really the takeaway from both the existing buildings as well as the prototypes that were designed by scratch from a local architect was not surprising that, the larger the unit sizes and the more parking that's required, then the larger the building sizes. So in looking at these examples, We also looked at various different parking standards from the existing one in the zone of benefit to 1.5 that the subcommittee had suggested we look at to 2 spaces per unit, and also equivalencies in the commercial areas for 1 space per 200 square feet and 1 space per 500 square feet. So without getting into too much detail on that, basically that was the takeaway, is the more parking that's required and the bigger unit size, then you're going to get bigger buildings, and a couple of the examples definitely showed 4-story buildings. We then returned to the council on March 1st to report back on these 2 meetings of the ad hoc subcommittee. And the council as a whole directed the subcommittee to continue its work. They felt that some progress was being made, it was valuable work, and asked them to continue for 3 more months to try and resolve the outstanding issues. And then at that meeting, they proceeded to also define some of the outstanding issues that had yet to be resolved for the council that they would like the ad hoc subcommittee to review. So then, with those orders, then the staff went back and developed an approach and a schedule to meet that 3-month deadline for the ad hoc subcommittee, and I believe that's been handed out to you there. That handout that is also posted on the website as to the approach and schedule, and I would like to refer to that if you have that in front of you there. So if you look down at the bottom of that, it shows the meeting dates and the topics. And so for last week, the first meeting, there was a discussion. The discussion first started off with confirming that, yes, these are the issues and this schedule seems appropriate. The only real addition that was added here was the historic element, a discussion of the historic element. So that was added to the following meeting, which would be next Friday on March 25th. And just to backstep a little bit, basically the schedule that has been proposed and that we are now working on is that the ad hoc subcommittee will be meeting every other Friday, starting last Friday through May 6th in the afternoons at 630 Garden Street from 1:30 to 4. So we will continue that discussion on density and unit sizes. And just to give you a quick synopsis of what occurred last week, essentially the ad hoc subcommittee was focused on, at first, the adaptive management piece, if you will, of increasing densities. And I think this has been talked about. It was talked about as far back as that last meeting in November 16th by a couple of the council people. And the idea being that their high density would be looked at in a small window of time with a sunset. So in other words, what was being proposed here was a 5-year time period where a high density would be allowed, and then that would be associated with a cap on the number of units. And at one point, the city attorney weighed in last Friday and said that probably wouldn't have been the preferable way to do it. Just a cap would be the cleanest way, but a time period would be the cleanest way. But yeah, we could do with a cap, given that this is an incentive program and that the base densities would still remain the same. So it wouldn't, nobody would have to participate in this program. They could still get their base density, and so he felt that we were on on solid legal ground to institute this with a incentive program, and that's essentially what the average unit density program would be. So there seemed to be some agreement with this 5-year, 100 cap unit combination as a starting point to bring back to the council. And then the other issue was just simply, did the ad hoc subcommittee feel comfortable with dual density, with replacing variable density with average unit density at 2 different levels, the medium high and the high that I referred to earlier. And again, I think that there was some movement on that. It seems like that that is a possibility. So with that, the ad hoc subcommittee moved to continue that till next week and think about that a little bit, those two matters, and then to take up the location of where these higher densities would be located. So both the average unit density, medium, high, and high, as well as any kind of overlay. And as you recall, we do that would be the third component, would be the rental employer housing overlay. So just to continue, and this I'll wrap up with this, just to run you quickly through, and those out in the audience there, what is scheduled for the next few meetings. Then next March 25th would be a continuation discussion of the density and unit size, and particularly the location. Also on the agenda would be a discussion of FARs, size, bulk, and scale, and neighborhood compatibility. And then the third item, which was added, would be the historic element and a discussion of that. On April 8th, the agenda would include circulation and parking policies, and then a discussion of air quality, highway setback, that buffer policy of somewhere between 250 and 500 feet, and then a briefing on the adaptive management program. April 19th would be a council check-in, and this is something that the council was very clear they wanted after 3 meetings to see what kind of progress was being made, and so we will be returning to the council on April 19th to review the ad hoc committee's progress and to confirm the direction. And then, assuming everything's fine there, the last 3 meetings, April 22nd, would be a comprehensive document review going basically cover to cover, but would include specifically the noise policy, the non-residential growth limitation policy, otherwise known as Measure E, second units, and then any other remaining issues. And then that would be continued over as necessary to May 6th with a return to council on May 24th. So that gives you a sense of the approach and schedule of this ad hoc committee, and I would say that they did make some progress last week, and so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. As John said, we got a brief update at our lunch meeting back on the 24th of February, and we really didn't get a chance to kind of chew on where we are, so I thought it was really important to have us give us the opportunity as a commission to have a real discussion about where we are and where we're going and what the commission can do to be of service to the council. And tomorrow, it turns out, we are coming up on the first anniversary of the draft general plan update being on the streets for the public and for the commission and for the council and for everybody to look at. And while I'm normally an optimistic person, looking back and seeing how much time has gone by, I continue to be concerned about the implications of no decision on a general plan. And that's because, in part, it requires a supermajority of council to adopt. And I started thinking about this, and I realized that there are some foregone revenues that the city is not able to apply for in the form of housing grants that we're just not able to even get in the door on for improvements regarding parks and other things related to the production of housing. And that we continue to invest considerable time, budget, and resources, and a useful outcome is still not guaranteed at this point in time. And obviously we're in non-compliance with state planning law, and there are negative impacts and social impacts of not having a general plan update associated with the status quo. And really, I tried to come back to the basics here. And really what, in my opinion, the general plan was prepared to facilitate providing housing that the middle class needs so they can live near where they work. That's in a nutshell this whole jobs housing issue that has driven our desire to provide workforce housing in addition, the sustainability principles to incorporate the production and provision of housing as part of the other natural and infrastructure issues that we hold so dear in terms of our living within our resources piece. And the issue of density seems to be holding this process hostage because that's a one-dimensional piece. Although important, it's not the only thing. And so I went back to when the Commission made its resolution passed by a supermajority with one dissenting voice, and we put forth a package of ideas. And I tried to preface the motion I made with 6 basic principles or guiding principles that whatever happened to the general plan update, that those principles would be respected and taken into account as the Council deliberated, got more public input, and sought to refine what we put forth to them as a good starting point. And those principles are basically that sustainability and living with our resources are core values, that we need to have an adaptive management plan to use in terms of dealing with unintended consequences, to mitigate significant environmental impacts as much as possible. That's always been a plank of our city's value set. And fourthly, to adopt principles and policies that are internally consistent and collectively coherent. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the general plan update that's approved, you don't have one policy telling you to do one thing and another policy telling you not to do that thing. So it's got to be in alignment to some degree. And the thought that we needed to be realistic, practical, and to garner community support for whatever happened from the time the Planning Commission left off and the City Council took up and is attempting to make a decision. And lastly, and pretty most importantly, I think to support the economic vitality of the downtown and the city at large. And so with my sense that the community is getting somewhat lethargic about this process because it's taken so long, not that people aren't trying to do a good job, but that it's taking a long time, I wanted to put forth what I referred to as Plan B. And Plan B is really a fallback proposal should the Council not be able to agree on a path forward with a 5-2 vote or a supermajority. And it's really a subset of Plan Santa Barbara that can be implemented now. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles in it. I wish it did. Some people don't. But rather than argue about some of the details, I thought it would be important for us to consider what we might do to give the Council somewhat of a fallback in case they couldn't get to that five-vote majority. And I wanted to focus it in on a 5-year time horizon because, as we've been talking about for many years now, our realistic planning focus is in 5 years. We'd like to think about 20 years, but realistically, that's what people can understand and deal with. And I wanted to put something out there that really attains some legal compliance with state law pertaining to the housing element. We need to revise the housing element every 5 years, and until we do so, we're not being able to be opportunistic in terms of looking for funding sources to help make the city a better place. And lastly, I wanted to target the downtown first, because we've heard from the Mesa neighborhood and we've heard from the Upper East about what's good about their neighborhoods, and we've heard to some degree from the downtown organization about the importance of their neighborhood as well, but that's really the heart of the city. It's really the heart of the South Coast, and I wanted to put something out that would really speak to that issue. So what I tried to do was to put together a 3-pronged proposal. And I went into a little bit more detail in this little 3-page memo I put together. But it suggests that we adopt the housing element with the map that's proposed by the community groups, referred to in some cases as the coalition. And while I'd like to go with the Planning Commission recommendation for the map, it seems like it's a more practical approach to acknowledge the good work that was done by community groups in refining our proposal and getting something that they feel they can get behind that makes sense as well. And the second piece was to make sure that we take the essence of the historical and cultural piece of the general plan update and make sure we protect the historical resources with the buffers that we talked about. That was a very, very important talking point when we considered and made our recommendations, as well as policy protections. And lastly, to focus investment of energy and resources on revitalizing the downtown. Now, what does that look like? As far as the downtown goes, it means specifically providing some impetus for institutional uses to relocate from their residential neighborhoods, such as the Upper East. We know the Upper East has a considerable number of institutional uses that makes them a little nervous, but to provide opportunities to help them move downtown to increase the vibrancy of the downtown. And to do that in a way that protects and builds public and private partnerships. And the third piece is to kind of think ahead a little bit and develop some type of transition plan for post-redevelopment area infrastructure. In 2015, I believe it is, we lose, if not sooner, our redevelopment agency tax increment funding, and that's going to cause some real challenges for the downtown. And so I think we need to think in a policy level of what to do when that starts to approach us. And then to take the elements of Plan Santa Barbara policies that relate to the downtown and reinforce what we've been talking about. While they may cause some heartburn to some folks in some parts of the city in specific neighborhoods, there seems to be a lot of support from the downtown businesses to make these types of policies work for the downtown and then let the private sector do the heavy lifting to make things happen. So that's the essence of what I put forth here. And I listed out some of the actual policies that I think could help us get there. So I wanted to just kind of ask the basic question of the Commission, is there something we should be doing now to help the Council along? Is this a good approach? If not, do we do anything about it or do we stand down? And then what can we do to help provide the insurance necessary so that we can get something out of the end of this process and not have spent the money and effort and investment of community infrastructure and community capital in a process that didn't yield a good positive result. So I'd like to kind of entertain a first level of discussion at the Commission level and then open it up for I've got a couple of green slips for public input and then see where we go from there. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there's a first thing here. Well, it puzzles me, your approach, because it includes the high density for some of the city, the commercial areas, some of the office areas. And since this process began, the council has changed. There are 4 people on it now who are not in support of high density. I disagree that this process is falling apart. I double-checked. Mr. Ledbetter spoke to some of the things that were discussed at last Friday's meeting of the ad hoc committee. It seemed to me considerable progress was made there. Well, and perhaps I should go back and say that when seeing this, that there wasn't going to be, it didn't seem as if there could be 5 votes. Last fall, working both with Council members Williams and Francisco, I came up with a proposal which actually led to what Councilmember Francisco has proposed and which the ad hoc committee seemed to be ready to go with. The very limited number of high-density units in high-density projects over 5 years as an experiment to see how it works. You know, you mentioned sustainability and living within resources under part of the principles. going way back when, to 1975, 1974, in the Impacts of Growth report, the Planning Commission was given the task of looking at that and saying, well, what can really be supported with our resources? What can our street carrying capacity handle? What our air basin and water supplies? What fits within that? And we came up with the either famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, 85,000 population limit, optimum, not population goal, let's put it that way. And there was a reason for that. And what has been proposed, and which is why I was opposed to the, on the density issue, the motion that the Planning Commission approved on a 6-to-1 vote, was that it was undoing all of that. It was upping the density again. And I have continued to look to see how that would help the city of Santa Barbara. Purely increasing density alone, it isn't going to do anything. 2 members of the city council have repeatedly asked for evidence of where this has been applied and what it has done, and they have had no answer. What the ad hoc committee has been working toward, and with the overlays, there is support for bonus densities for rental and employer housing. I suggested allowing a bonus for all residential development on non-residentially zoned land. Councilmember White asked that be carried forward, that concept. And then there would need to be an overlay for what areas would allow the high-density experimental projects. If the city goes ahead and increases the density, upzones the property, they are definitely giving a benefit to the property owners. But where is the benefit to the city? It cannot be, it's almost impossible to undo that kind of action. Where there is a benefit is with these overlays, and as I said, I have been to all the ad hoc committee meetings, all the city council meetings relating to this, and I think they are going to get to yes. I am not operating out of fear. I am feeling quite optimistic about it, and I think it's a plan that will suit Santa Barbara. It will keep us living within our resources, this whole idea that somehow increasing the density is going to provide affordable middle-income housing without some kind of restraints, controls, requirements, that it be rental, that it be employer, that it be something. There is nothing to assure that the city will get any benefit from it. With what Councilmember Francisco has proposed and your adaptive management program, then if it turns out it works, the city hasn't tied its hands. It can go ahead and perhaps make more of the city open to high-density development. But if you go ahead and do that first, and you come along and some of these things happen, and you look at it with adaptive management and say, oops, that was a mistake, you cannot go back. And so I think that the direction that the ad hoc committee has been taking is positive. I think they will get to to proposals that will be acceptable to the supermajority, if not more. And we will have a whole general plan. And I know in conversations with the mayor, she's really eager to get this thing finished, as I think they all are, and not just on a partial basis, to do the entire thing. So I think, the Planning Commission worked really hard on it, made our recommendations, and it's in the council's hands. And I think to try to step in now at this point, and by the way, I think you have some good ideas for downtown, good, but that could come later as the general plan is being fleshed out. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Lodge. Mr. Bartlett, and then we'll open it up for some public comment.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair Jostis, and I do appreciate your bringing this matter back to the commission, because I know that we've all put years of energy into this effort, and then to have it be silent for the last few months has been pretty excruciating. And then lately, watching the ad hoc city council subcommittee meetings, it just seems like we've deviated so far from the path that we all thought that we were on, and working toward a goal along with the community. And it just feels like all of our efforts have been for naught. And I would hope that we could at least interject enough to perhaps remind the council of the collective effort that has been built to this point, and to not totally disregard it. And I'm disturbed by the characterization that the proposed density increase, which is shrinking buildings, is an experiment. I think what it is a retreat to the time when we built the heart of Santa Barbara in the manner that we are all proud of. And let's end the experiment that we've been under for the last 3.5 decades of autopia, sprawl, and low density. I think that is what has failed, and I don't see that retreating to a density that was really what the heart of this city was built on is an experiment. I think all the examples that have been shown during our Planning Commission deliberations of the beautiful buildings that we're all proud of are exactly the scale of buildings that are being proposed under Plan Santa Barbara to produce the types of housing that we need for our workforce. And the idea of having a 5-year cap and a 100-unit cap, and I'm not quite sure how they define that. Would that be 100 units that fall within the high-density category, or is that 100 units built throughout the city? I don't know. They're not being very clear, but with a projected growth for 20 years of 2,800 units, that would be about 4 or 5 months worth of units, and then we're going to be on a 5-year hiatus to examine those efforts. I mean, it feels more like a moratorium than moving forward. So I don't necessarily go along with that approach, and I hope there's more discussion at the ad hoc subcommittee level as we go forward. The mischaracterization of increased density, I think, is really doing a disservice to the whole discussion. We're talking about smaller buildings and smaller units to accommodate more workforce and to reduce the impacts associated with all of our resources, water, traffic, everything else related to building closer to the work than out in the suburbs. So I hope we can get beyond the semantics of density, and I wish there were other parameters that we could use so that that doesn't seem to be the stumbling block. But I do feel that the Commission needs to stay involved, otherwise all of our collective efforts over these years will have been wasted, and I would like to think that our contribution can still be positive and of a benefit to the city, and if it means coming up with an abbreviated plan to at least satisfy the state requirements and get the ball rolling downtown for this first 5-year increment, I would certainly support it. To do nothing is picking the worst of all of our choices, and I know we've reiterated that previously, and unfortunately, the no project scenario, which is being selected out of default on action, is the most impactful of all the choices that could have been made, and I hope that we can end this stalemate that we're in. So I would hope that the Commission can get re-engaged. I think that we need to reactivate the subcommittee and really participate in the City Council and the subcommittee hearings as they go forward, and really see if we can get it to a decision point, whether it's the full Plan Santa Barbara or an incremental step toward that goal. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Any other folks in the Commission yet, or shall we go for public comment? At this point, I'll open up the public portion. And our first speaker is Mickey Flax, speaking on behalf of Santa Barbara for All.
Chair Jostis,
yes.
If I could just, on the smaller buildings, going to the ad hoc committee has agreed to go ahead with replacing variable density with average unit size as the metric, and so that's where the smaller buildings are coming in.
I understand. That was a good step forward. Ms. Flax.
I want to thank Commissioner Justice for putting this on the agenda, essentially to reiterate the Planning Commission's approval of a modified Plan Santa Barbara and reiterate its concerns about the principles that John put up there, including sustainability. There have been people on the council questioning the whole notion of why sustainability should be part of a general plan, and it's important for the community and the Planning Commission to reiterate that. Secondly, I remember, I think a year or two ago, standing here at one of the first hearings and suggesting that the housing element be separated from the general plan update and passed immediately, because we knew that we had the zoning without any changes, without a single change, to accommodate the RENA numbers, and we could just pass that housing element and not be out of compliance and not deprive ourselves of funds. And I reiterate that again. I think that the Planning Commission should ask that that be done. It's important to incorporate, as I think Plan B tries to do, some of the land use, the economic and historic preservation principles, and get them passed, get them to be the commitment of the City Council to General Plan Santa Barbara while the details of density are still being discussed. The plan is much more than density, and it is being held hostage to discussions of which density should be on which block. I think that really is seeing every leaf on the tree and totally ignoring the forest. I also want to point out that the coalition that presented essentially support of the Planning Commission's recommendations in broad outline, with a few recommendations of its own, represents, and I want to read it again for the record, the following organizations: the League of Women Voters, the Community Environmental Council, Santa Barbara for All, Citizens Planning Association, the Central Coast Home Builders Association, SB County Action Network, the Coastal Housing Coalition, and the Coalition for Healthy Communities. Those are not folks who sleep together, usually. Those are folks who have been debating, who have been on different sides of this issue, and yet they came together to support a plan that, as I say, reflects the Planning Commission as well as specific recommendations about where areas of higher density should exist. And in that regard, I think that what this community has to decide, and what the City Council is in fact hung up on at the moment, is do we want a city that continues to decrease in population, living population, as the latest census figures have shown, not for the first time, and in which the people who work here, who do the work of the city, who contribute to the economic development of everybody who lives here, those people will not be permitted to live here. It's almost like we're going back to segregation, except it's not on the basis of race, it's on the basis of income. That is equally undemocratic and inconsistent with the principles that America, and certainly this community, are supposed to be founded on. 40 years ago, when Commissioner Lodge and I were trying to elect a new city council that took some of these ideas into consideration and considered the environment, we developed a list of questions for prospective candidates. And I remember one of the questions was for incumbents who were running again: how often did you vote to override the Planning Commission? And we considered that any candidate who said he or she had done so a great deal was not the kind of candidate we wanted to support. And I suggest that we're in that same situation now. The Planning Commission, a giant, important segment of the community, has made recommendations, and now the City Council is trying to reinvent the wheel, go back to first principles, and ignore all of those recommendations. Again, that's not the way the process should work, and that's not the way the community and its institutions are being respected and honored. Thank you.
Debbie Cox Bolton. Ms. Lodge?
Just quickly, at one of the ad hoc committee meetings, Connie Hanna from the League of Women Voters said that they went along with the coalition agreement in a spirit of cooperation. However, they have never supported high density in downtown Santa Barbara.
Ms. Bolton.
Chair Justice, my name is Debbie Cox-Bolton. I'm with the Coastal Housing Coalition. We represent thousands of local workers here on the South Coast, and we've been involved in Plan Santa Barbara since for years, like you, and we've been proud to be part of that community coalition that came together. I won't reiterate what a broad coalition that was, but that essentially supported the Planning Commission's efforts and tried to build on them. And we were disappointed when the plan failed at the council last year. We simply wanted to come today to reiterate our support for the Planning Commission's work and for the coalition's work. We share concerns that have been raised today and have been raised elsewhere about the implications of not having a certified housing element, as well as the implications that we all know that were borne out by the EIR in terms of the status quo being the way we were going. So much money has been spent, so much time has been spent, that we are just anxious to see some kind of successful resolution to this process. We would be incredibly supportive of the Planning Commission's re-engagement on this effort. We think it's critical, and would support some kind of pared down scope that such along the lines that the chair suggested today, as long as it was consistent with the Commission's previous work and the coalition's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Last speaker is Mr. Michael Halliday, representing the Chamber of Commerce.
Mr. Chair, member of the Planning Commission, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. I want to applaud Commissioner Jostis' work and this Planning Commission's work. We think you guys have done exemplary work over the years. I've been part of this process personally for 5 years. And it's hard to imagine a process that is more broadly supported by this community. If you look at the environmental community, the social justice community, the business community, we've all supported and been here many, many times to speak in support of Plan Santa Barbara. We think it's progressive, we think it's innovative, and we think it is dealing with the heart of sustainability, which is getting more from less. That's what it is. It's trying to fit more into less, and that's how we're trying to deal with the resources that we've got. I'm here today to speak specifically on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. We were strong supporters of Plan Santa Barbara moving forward. We think that we applaud the Commission for a Plan B scenario that gets part of this moving forward. And while we haven't actually taken Plan B back to our committee yet, I did speak with several of the members of my board, and we would certainly support this plan moving forward, and we would encourage City Council to take heed to all the support that this community has put behind the Plan Santa Barbara process. So I specifically appreciate the focus on the housing element. I think that's important. Protection of the historical resources is certainly an important issue. We think that's included in your Plan B scenario. And it supports the work of the subcommittee and as well as your own city staff. I mean, this recommendation is coming up from your own city staff and city members. So we would just like to encourage you to move forward with this. We hope the Planning Commission will stay engaged in this process and will move this back to the City Council so that we can all benefit from 5 years, literally, of time, money, and effort that's been put into this process. So thank you for your continued efforts, and the business community is behind you. Thank you.
Mr. Halliday.
Yes.
How is the status quo impacting your members in terms of keeping or losing or the whole stability of your employment base?
Well, I think that's, you couldn't kind of get a more poignant time in history to sort of look at when do you want to try to adopt these kinds of actions. And I think that if you look at our professional community, the architects and the construction trade, we very much are being impacted by sort of the de facto default scenario, which is a moratorium in essence. So we're being severely impacted by it. And Santa Barbara's just got a beautiful history about doing things right. We just believe in this community. We believe in the design review criteria, and we think we can embrace the criteria that's been put forth in Plan Santa Barbara and come up with beautiful architecture and beautiful buildings and continue to maintain the downtown without compromising anything. So, yeah, our community, our professional community is severely impacted by the economy, and we'd like to think we can do something here on the South Coast and here in Santa Barbara to make a difference. And we think that's what your Plan B scenario has pointed out. Let's come up with something that we can agree on and move it forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops. Other comments by the commissioners who haven't spoken yet? Any comments? Mr. Jordan.
Okay, you'll drag me into this.
I will.
But I really have...
I think it's important
I
to
have
hear
little-
the voices of all of our commissioners present on this issue.
I have little positive to add because I pretty much, in answer to Ms. Flack's questions, I think it's probably yes. There is a group of people that are going backwards, and I don't share her passion for the end of democracy and civilization as we know it, but it seems to me that the tough question is you're not going to find 5 people to get concurrence on anything right now. I would even go so far as to do my my half-empty imitation and start to wager that it's not going to happen until January, just because of the year it is. And if it happens sooner than that, I'll start taking people to dinner, because I think the political reality is that it's not going to happen before the start of the year. In answer to a couple things I heard about evidence, there's also no evidence that shows that the status quo or the living within our resources or the standing pat will result in improvements. Just as there's no evidence the other way either. There's no evidence for anything in this. It's a test right now to see who's right, and it's obvious to me that that right now that one side is going to win, and that even a comment from Connie Hanna that they haven't supported high density but went along to it is just an example of great compromise. And that's why they were part of that process. It's not a negative that they come back and say that. It's part of the compromise. And I'm concerned, again, with the premise of where we would go with this, because, as Commissioner Lodge does say, they've already had subcommittee meetings and moved on to an option 2, and now we're looking at going back and offering an option 1. And I don't really know where that's going or how to do that. So I sound pretty depressed about this, don't I? I realize, but it just seems like I share your concern, Mr. Chair, that it's mired in a process that's going on and on and on, that there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, that there's not a shared urgency to move in a direction where there is a resolution, that we're just continuing down the path. And frankly, I'm at a loss to see what else to do with that. So I'll wait for some suggestions there to see if that offers me anything.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan? Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a case of the more things change, the more they stay the same, it would appear to me, and planning is quickly turning into politics, which is most unfortunate for the process we've been through. I certainly, there's a couple of things that interest me. One is what RENA may morph into or retreat from, and because of economy and all that kind of thing, or if it's cast in concrete and it never can be altered. The other is I really appreciate a Plan B, because obviously our Plan A ain't going nowhere, and we need to do something, even though it's not considered optimal. I don't consider it optimal because it doesn't contain a standalone historic element, among other things. And that's part of what I'm talking about, what we're holding hostage in the process. So we're losing ground. It's sort of like being sick and fighting about the treatment. And while we fight about the treatment, the patient doesn't flourish. So those are my concerns. It doesn't, to me, at first I was really impressed with all the years I put into it, and then I thought, how long have I lived in Santa Barbara? Almost 40 years. How long have I had that give a care factor that brings me to the Planning Commission today? 40 years. So what's 5 in the face of 40? It's okay. But I do want it to go somewhere, and I want it to be of benefit. So I would urge the council to keep pressing on, looking for common ground amongst themselves, because I feel that the amount of energy and time expended by the coalition to bring a solution that was acceptable was astounding. That we got there from where we started was great. And so I hope that the council can work with some of that kind of principle and get there as well for the supermajority they need. We were able to get there ourselves at one time. So that's what I have to say. And if a Plan B can happen, I certainly, the idea specifically to Plan B is actually not a bad idea with a 5-year time horizon, although I'm assuming it's 100 units. I don't have a size. I don't know if that's 100 units per year, 100 units, out there in 5 years, 20 units a year. I don't know what we're proposing to be built to be evaluated. However, it certainly is a fine test for adaptive management, which is a critical part of the general plan. So if that were fleshed out, I think that City Council might entertain a close look at it. It is very important that we attain compliance with state law, unless, of course, we're going to go into that area where some ignore state law completely now and say, by golly, we don't need no stinking state law. Well, we do. And targeting downtown first, I'd feel confident with a historic element, but that's held hostage right now, so we can't go forward with that. So I'm not going to say anything about that, except got to protect what we've got to go forward. So those are my thoughts, and I thank you for Mr. Joseph for spending the time to think about this some more, and Ms. Lodge as well. But it's entered the political realm, and I think we all have an appreciation for what that means, as do the people who have to make the next vote. They all know. So that's where it is. For me, quote, scripsi scripsi is my Latin motto on this. Thanks.
Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ledbetter, a number of people have mentioned the desire that the historic element be in there. My recollection is that more than once at ad hoc committee meetings way back, and even at some of the early council meetings on the subject, there was agreement. There is to be a historic element. Now, somehow that doesn't seem to have gotten folded into staff's recollection. And am I misremembering?
Chair Justice, Council Lodge, as far as staff is concerned, the former is correct. Our understanding is that Plan Santa Barbara will include a historic element. We have the beginnings of that with a set of goals and policies, and then we have what's developed through the Planning Commission's good work, the interim policies with the buffers. That's all included as part of the package. None of that has been taken out, and if anything, I think the council has reinforced their interest in that. I might add, just as long as I got the microphone here, just a clarification on the 5-year 100-unit cap. What was talked about at the last meeting was that the 500 units would only apply to the high-density projects. Wouldn't apply to any of the other zones, single-family, duplex, even medium-high, nor to housing authority projects. It would just be towards the high density. But nevertheless, that's 100 units over 5 years. So, for that category.
Thank you, John. Maybe this whole idea is not going to go anywhere, but I sit up here in the first third of my last year in 8 years as a planning commissioner, and I volunteered and I know everybody else up here, has volunteered a tremendous amount of time to try to make this process happen. And we've all gotten frustrated at one point or another. And I had not gone to the subcommittee meetings because, quite frankly, like many others, I'm burnt out on this process. We put an inordinate amount of time. But then I couldn't stay away from last week when I realized that Ms. Lodge's competence and persistence in getting your views across has just been remarkable. And at the same time, that's the lone minority view of the Commission, and the Commission's will was not being presented to the subcommittee. And so I had to stand up and say, I think we need to, as a Commission, have a voice. And that's why I stood up, and that's why I put this piece together, because I think, we are chartered by the city charter, with the number one reason for us being in our first task and duty in the charter is to make recommendations to the city council about the general plan. And here we've done that, and we are not on the same page whatsoever. Our recommendations have gone by the wayside, and that's very frustrating to me. Ms. Larson.
Mr. Chair, to be perfectly honest, never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine lobbying City Council for any point of view. After we make a formal set of recommendations, then it wouldn't occur to me, because we said what we did and it's all in writing. It's been vetted by the public. There's been mountains of literature. There's been gatherings of hundreds of people in the process. And I thought that as we went forward and we made this very clear, we couldn't be clearer, that we'd have to revisit and restudy that which we have studied for the amount of time with the number of people. Now, to go back into this, and I can't even imagine the howl that would come from everyone to not get a full flow charts, giant papers, the full rollout of everything that we did again over something. I can't imagine going and lobbying. I mean, I could see providing information, but I suppose it's okay to do. It just would never occur to me. Thanks.
That really brings us to whether we want to have a subcommittee. And we've deferred this. We had an ad hoc committee. We wanted to wait as far as hearing the council's progress on March 1st as to whether we should continue the subcommittee, and if so, under what circumstances and with what task. So I'd ask the commission what willingness there is to put further effort into this, either in the form of a subcommittee or to just let it go and call it a day. Ms. Lodge, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
That's okay. I actually put it on because a comment that Commissioner Larson made. When this whole process started, there was this great enthusiasm for smart growth and the 12 principles of smart growth, and and that it should be applied to Santa Barbara. Well, when they did that with transportation, we're already there. We can't be made any smarter. Rob Dayton said so at the last city council meeting, and I talked to him afterwards on the general plan. We, on the 4 Ds, what are they? Density, diversity, destination, and design. When the model was applied, the smart growth model was applied to all of that, we are already there. And that the idea that, well, and there are many who've said, and, well, Santa Barbara is already an example of smart growth. First, it has developed at higher density, is around transportation corridors. We have nodes of commercial activity and then residential, and it has developed in a way that has protected the historic resources, that has protected the views, that has protected the small town feel, which I'd like to remind you, that was like the thing that people, when the report was made on the survey that was done, the outreach that was done for Plan Santa Barbara, those were the things that people really love about Santa Barbara. Anyway, and those are also the things we love about Santa Barbara, and they are the things that are the basis of our economy. The most lucrative source of outside income for the city is tourism, through the bed tax and sales tax. Retirement income is, so, well, I'm not going to get into the economic study that was done. Retirement income is very important. People, and then there's some high-tech industry here. These are all things that can go wherever they wish, and they choose Santa Barbara. This is part of this catch-22 that we're in and have been forever. The more that we maintain this as a wonderful place to live, work, and visit, the more people are going to want to come here, and the housing prices are going to stay high. Economically, the city has done better than most other places, even though there's the recession, even though we're in a status quo, as it were. Unemployment rate was lower in the city, has been lower in the city of Santa Barbara than in the county, which has been lower than the state. And there just aren't, under the existing density, the city's been able to allow Casa de las Fuentes at 54 units to the acre, El Carrillo, which I think is 122 units to the acre. Now, of course, they're minuscule.
So, Ms. Lodge, I have to interrupt. How does that affect us moving forward as a commission? We understand what the past is.
I shouldn't get into why I took the position that I did and why I have. I do want to say that I in an effort to get something that could be said yes to by 5 people, I did work with Councilmember Williams and Councilmember Francisco, and it seems to me a perfectly legitimate thing for me to do, whether I have any connection with the Planning Commission or not.
Okay. Mr. Chair. Ms. Larson.
No, I just appreciate the disclosure, because I was unaware that's like, I mean, I realize this is, I don't think it would constitute ex parte communication, but I had no idea that was going on. That's why I say I would never personally think to do that. I'm not attacking you in any way or criticizing you for doing it. It just wouldn't occur to me. So I appreciate, though, knowing those conversations were held. I had no idea. And I would really like to know at another time, because I have to leave shortly, but with whom discussions were. I think that the Commission needs to know that, or the City Council members need to disclose that legally, that there's been discussion outside of the agendized meetings that are held. So it's just a thought, I mean, that's what we're here for, is for comments and thoughts, and I appreciate knowing. Thank you.
I want to try to refocus us on where do we go from here? How can we contribute? Mr. Jordan.
Okay. I'll answer your question.
Please.
Given my pessimistic prognosis of it'll take until next year, is that I think it would be worthwhile to maintain the committee. I'd volunteer to be on that committee. That would certainly re-engage me. I have much less of a long-term emotional burnout than some of you do. I think it's clear that we've had a functioning committee. It's been, or subcommittee. It's been the young lady to my right who's been doing the best job of a functioning subcommittee with council as we've gone through the process. And I agree that, whether I may agree with some of the things she has to say and disagree with others, but I think it's unfortunate that it's just been a single person who's been functioning at that high level of efficiency also. So, in answer to your question, I think, yes, that subcommittee should continue. I'd be happy to be part of that. In hindsight, just to throw in a couple questions that happened at my dinner table, I can tell you that part of the burnout is because the feeling is this whole thing took place backwards. What's taken place now should have taken place before any of the community outreach. Is that the community outreach should have taken place after we knew the political lay of the land and the direction that was going to go. And furthermore, I think if I was king, I'd make sure that any next general plan had to be approved within one election cycle, just to resolve that too. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Wish I'd thought of that. Okay, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I certainly support the direction of maintaining our engagement with council. We have so much invested. I don't relish the idea of getting back into it. We did so much heavy lifting last year, but I'd be happy to continue on the subcommittee, and I would hope that the subcommittee can actually represent the supermajority of the Planning Commission, because I think we're diluting our message and involvement when we are going the other direction. So I would be happy to serve again, and I'm willing to put in the time and effort, and I think if nothing else, it will add to perhaps transparency of the process so that the voters have a clear idea of what and who they are voting for come November, even if we can't get to a decision.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I journeyed back through Robert's Rules of Order on subcommittees. I guess I was trying to get to sleep the other night. But part of appointing a subcommittee is to reflect the diversity of the body that it is tasked to help move things forward. At the same time, like yourself, I think that a service on a subcommittee needs to be predicated on making the compelling arguments for whatever side you come down on, but at the same time respecting the will of the majority of the commission or whatever body that subcommittee serves as a part of service on that committee, understanding that we're a democratic system here and it's a majority rules type of situation, and we need to work with that. So,
Mr. Chair, are you suggesting that in that case that I should continue on it or go on it or not?
Well, it occurs to me that you have a view very different than the majority, and I don't want to snub that view, because I think it's important that view be out there. But I think if it's representing the commission, I'm hard pressed to see why you wouldn't respect the democratic process and support the will of the majority of the commission.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Help us out here, Mr.
Well, I've been quietly listening to see what direction the commission wants to go, and I wanted to allow you to have as organic of a conversation as possible. One thing is that a subcommittee advises to its commission. So if the commission wishes to re-engage its subcommittee, I would suggest that proper tasks for that subcommittee would be to flesh out your Plan B proposal, to recommend to the Planning Commission the process in which the Planning Commission as a whole would consider such a proposal, and how to present any comments on a proposal or any alternatives to that proposal to the City Council. My point is that the state's general plan process, and it is governed by state law, has a particular role and a very important role for the Planning Commission. And that process has certain noticing requirements for the hearings that the Planning Commission considers its recommendations to the City Council regarding general plans. And our own process for Plan Santa Barbara has incorporated significant noticing processes that go beyond the state minimum requirements. We were reminded of those by some of the speakers today as to how we got to your Commissioner Larson was mentioning the flow charts, the maps and everything else that went into a full vetting of the Planning Commission's recommendations to Council. So the purpose of my comment now is to focus the Commission on, if you're going to re-engage the Planning Commission subcommittee, I think that's within your purview. I want to be careful as to what the intended purpose of the subcommittee is. I think it would be inappropriate to have the subcommittee speaking for the Planning Commission to the City Council, since the Planning Commission has already made its recommendation.
Right.
If you want to make, as the Planning Commission, a contrary or alternative recommendation at this point, given the way the process has proceeded since your recommendation, then I think that should be an action of the Planning Commission as a whole, not a subcommittee of the Planning Commission.
Okay. Then it seems to me that we should continue the ad hoc subcommittee with the limited purpose of reviewing a Plan B to support the work of the Council subcommittee as its sole task, and that the committee be populated by members of the Commission that represent the variety of viewpoints on the Commission, which would include Mrs. Lodge and two other people, either Mr. Bartlett or Mr. Jordan. And as a chair, I'd like to be on it. So,
Mr. Chair, let me just resolve that for you. Then I think, just in all fairness to my intellect on this particular subject, I think it would be better if it was yourself and Mr. Bartlett. I recognize it can only be three. If there was four, I'd be right in there. But I think both of you have a much better foundation and day-to-day workings in your personal life with the subject matter, and would be a better choice. Grudgingly, I say that. Believe me.
So,
of course, unless you want to look at creating another subcommittee with the title of Strategy of Plan B and Lobbying Council for Approval, and just
I think we'll stop short of that, and I'm going to suggest that we maintain the existing makeup of the committee with the focus to review Plan B and see how we can support that we can feed back to the Planning Commission the results of our deliberation. Mr. Vincent, is that? I'm trying to characterize.
No, I think you're going down exactly the path that I would recommend if that's the direction you wish to go. I think Julie was wondering if you were making a motion.
I would look to someone besides my. I guess as the chair, I can make a motion in this case. Is that correct?
I believe you can make a motion.
Yes. So I would move the continuation of the Plan Santa Barbara Subcommittee with a focus on Plan B and an effort to feed back to the Commission, not the Council, the Commission, appropriate steps the Commission might take to further assist the Council and its subcommittee, if that is appropriate, in bringing closure to the Plan Santa Barbara process in a productive way.
I will second that.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Hopefully, we can re-engage the other commissioners when we meet at a later date. I don't believe we...
I'm sorry. Where were we? I'm sorry.
I think we're just about ready to adjourn, having covered the two major pieces of our...
I've got pictures to show you.
It would be so much better that if all of our commissioners could be present to see your pictures.
Chair Justice.
No. Yes, Ms.
Before we
Rodriguez.
leave, for the record, I want to make sure that the three commissioners that were on the subcommittee will remain on the continuous.
That's correct.
Just the same, Bartlett, Justice Lodge.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes.
would like to
Please do.
mention that the Water Commission had its last review of the final draft of the long-term water supply plan, and I think Mr. Jordan mentioned it earlier in the program will be going in the meeting. It will be going before the City Council on April 7th.
That's right.
I think that's
That is
right.
the joint meeting.
Yeah, the joint meeting with the Water Commission, and it looks good. Let's put it that way. Largely because people are using 2,000 acre feet of water less a year than they were at the beginning of the drought in the 80s.
So we're living within our resources with even more people in Santa Barbara.
That's true because of techniques, technology. Oh, I really did it, didn't I? And it's going to get even better because of new state law requirements on plumbing.
Good. Okay. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.